also been invited here by the American University with Alan and the UK Embassy to share some experience in helping civil society in Armenia prepare for the EITI. So this is the third day, and I think there's one or possibly two people who weren't here previously. Three people. Sorry, yes. So, would you like to introduce each one of yourselves very briefly, mention what your affiliation is to what organisation, and what you, I mean, I'm sorry you've missed quite a lot of the content already, but what your expectations are for today. So could we start with you?
Thank you for invitation. My name is Aida Iskoyan. I am professor of environmental law at the Yerevan State University, and many years ago, 1991, was established our organization, Environmental Public Information Center, and now I'm here because all kind of materials I can take and introduce this idea to my students, to my aspirants, for our research activities. And it's very, very important because, you know, public opinion regarding mining issues, and that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Emil Sarko for today.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Laura Petrosians. I work at the Yerevan State University in the Faculty of Law at the Environmental Law Resource Center as a lawyer, and also I work at NGO, Environmental Law Advocacy Center, and I'm also a PhD student at Faculty of Law, and the topic of my work is mining. That's why I'm interested in this meeting.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And sorry, you told me your name, but I already forgot.
I'm Valentina Gevorgian. I am a researcher here at the AUA, at the True Center for Policy Analysis. The range of my academic interests include the state and society relations, with a particular focus on civil society engagement into decision-making processes. So I'm very much here in the capacity of a researcher observer. And actually, we're also planning with to develop a case study of the Armenia's experience with the EITI. So,
Great.
very interesting. Well, thank you.
Okay, happy to read it. Thanks. Okay, so I mean, we covered a lot of ground already. For the first two sessions, we had participants also from the government and from industry. Yesterday afternoon session was just civil society, and today is just civil society. The best way perhaps for you to get a sense of what some of the issues we covered is to look at the agenda for the previous 2 days and look at some of the links. I know there's a lot of links there, and you probably don't have time to look at all of them. We covered a range of issues. There was a lot of interest in the decision-making of the multi-stakeholder group, how civil society can influence the decisions, what the kind of the protocols are, formality or otherwise, how the relationship with the chair of the multi-stakeholder group and with the independent administrators, as well as background to the whole initiative of extractive industry transparency, how it emerged as an issue 10 or 15 years ago, development of the EITI, the role of the coalition I work with, Publish What You Pay, which is a global coalition, some recent developments in the EITI, because we now have a new standard. In 2016 in Lima, the EITI International Board adopted a new standard, very similar to the 2013 standard, but there are some modifications and improvements. So that document is available to download. I think those are the main. Is there anything anybody who has been present over the last 2 days would highlight as something important that we covered, maybe for people who are just joining today?
We also went through the details of your working plan, how you came up with the working plan, and what exactly were the activities outlined, who was responsible for what, how it was structured. And what was new for me, at least, was that within the multi-stakeholder group, there are subgroups that are doing the activity, making a lot of the decisions happen in subgroups. Sorry,
that's helpful. Thanks, Alan. Yes, we looked at. There is a government web page for the EITI in the UK, and just to repeat what I've been saying for 2 days, I'm referring to the UK EITI not because it's the best, but because it's what I know, it's what I'm involved in. So where there are good practices in the UK, you know, I would encourage you to adapt them, but where there are bad practices, not everything is good, you know, you learn from that. So there is a UK government webpage which is quite helpful. So for example, we talked for quite a long time about the terms of reference for the MSG. So we have got our kind of formal constitution for the multi-stakeholder group, which was drafted by the government. We've made a few amendments to it. And we also talked about the work plan, as Alan said, because I think our experience in the UK is that there is a huge amount of detailed work that is required to deliver the EITI. Quite a challenge, even for an apparently well-resourced country like the UK, you know. So a lot of the work is broken down into subgroups. The multi-stakeholder group meets only every 2 months for 4 hours, and there's an occasional email exchange. But members of the multi-stakeholder group do a lot of the detailed work in the subgroups, in between MSG meetings, meeting maybe 2 or 3 times, or having telephone conferences and so on. So there was...
I'm sorry,
yes.
There's one other critical difference, I think, that the starting point for the British, the UK MSG was that everyone trusted the government, the agencies that were involved and the individuals that were involved were well known and trusted, and that was very important so that from the get-go they didn't have the same situation we have here in Armenia. There was much more trust already built over other activities that you had engaged with. So it's an important difference, and that's also why we can't just copy-paste, because there was a very different background how they started their activities.
That's certainly true. There was a lot of trust, but it wasn't complete trust. And certainly between civil society and the companies, the oil companies, representatives of the oil companies. In the UK, the mining sector is very small. The big sector is oil and gas, offshore oil and gas, which is 100 times larger than the mining sector in terms of revenues generated. And we had problems with the oil companies in relation to, this is the other issue that we covered, as I'm not sure how many people know this, but whereas the EITI is basically a voluntary initiative for the government, it's a voluntary step for the host government to take about extractive activities within the country, there is also a set of laws, mandatory country-by-country disclosure laws, which are now in force in the European Union, in Canada and Norway, and should be enforced in the United States, except the oil companies have taken the US government agency to court in order to try to weaken the requirements. But there's basically a global standard of extractive reporting which is common to the rules in the US that have yet to be implemented, the rules in the EU, the rules in Canada, and the rules in Norway. And those requirements for oil, gas and mining companies are very, very close to being identical to the EITI reporting requirements, but there are some differences, and the mechanism is different. So we talked a little bit yesterday and the day before about the differences between the two regimes. The main difference is mandatory reporting is a home government requirement, so the country where the companies are either headquartered or raise funds on a public stock exchange imposes that rule, whereas with the EITI, it's the government of the country where the companies are operating that requires the disclosure. So there's that difference. And also the existence of the multi-stakeholder group in the EITI is unique to the EITI.
One other difference, if I could highlight, I think from, and correct me if I'm wrong, one other difference is that the mandatory reporting laws are mandating the companies to report, whereas EITI is also mandating the government to report what they receive from the extractive sector.
So there's no reconciliation in the mandatory reporting regimes, but reconciliation is at the heart of the EITI. I think that really covers the main issues that we talked about, I mean, in various levels of detail over the last 2 days. And a lot of the conversation was particularly between government representatives and industry and civil society about issues of trust and what happens if the government commits to doing something and doesn't do it. And certainly our experience in the UK and internationally with the EITIs, sometimes civil society has to act on a point of principle in a way that the other stakeholders won't like it. So at the global conference in Lima, as Alan knows, most of civil society boycotted one of the board meetings because we considered that the international chair and the international secretariat had overridden our perspective, what we were asking for. And in the UK, on one occasion a year ago, we asked and persuaded the minister to cancel an EITI multi-stakeholder group meeting because of a problem we had with industry on the mandatory reporting side. So we talked a bit about that, and you know, I think it's very important for civil society to engage in a spirit of cooperation and trust and collaboration, but you have your red lines, and if an important point of principle is not respected by the government or industry, you have to draw the line somewhere and say this, we cannot accept this. So.
One more thing. I think another, and this may be easier accomplished in the UK, I think another best practice, if you will, from the EITI and the relationship with the mandatory reporting laws is that, in fact, in some countries there has been a problem with when there are no mandatory reporting laws, companies refuse to report, saying this is a voluntary standard, you don't have to report. And then there's a mess kind of you end up with. You don't know. So one of the best practices, I think a few countries have done this, along with the EITI process or part of the working plan. They've identified adopting mandatory reporting laws as part of
an EITI law. It's actually an EITI law. So, for example, in Nigeria, I can't think what other countries, possibly Liberia or Ghana, the government passes a law for the EITI. It says, under this law, if you are operating in our country and you're making payments above whatever the minimum threshold is, you have to report. Now, in the UK and the US, the governments didn't want to pass a law because it goes against their approach to self-regulation of business. They don't want to be seen as too strict. But we now have the problem in the UK where a small number of companies did not report. And in the US, some of the oil companies in the first year have refused to report their taxes. We think it's because they hardly pay any tax. So that will be a problem for validation, because for the country to be validated as compliant on its second report, you have to have 100% of company compliance with the reporting requirement. So as Alan said, maybe in Armenia it will be a case of a law being necessary. Yeah. Yeah, well, because of the timetable, you have to publish your first report within 18 months of being accepted as a candidate. And you have to apply for validation within 24 months, I think it is. It's specified exactly the timing in the standard. So the usual pattern, and that's what's been followed in the US and the UK, your first report is like a practice, you know, like a pilot, and you won't be validated for that. But we know that the next report in the UK in 2070 will be the one that we will be validated on, so it has to have all the essential coverage. Yes.
Հասկանալի է, որ Արմենիայի և Հայաստանի միջև կան տարբերություններ, հանքավայրերի հանքարդյունաբերության ճյուղերի հետ կապված։ Ձեզ մոտ նավթ ու գազն է հիմնական և խոշոր հատվածն է ներկայացնում բիզնեսի։ Մեզ մոտ հիմնական մետաղական հանքավայրերն են։ Եվ դրանց մեջ մեկ-երկուսն են, որ չափերով շատ խոշոր տնտեսական գործունեություն են ծավալում։ Մեծ մասը հանքավայրերի, մոտ տասնյակ հանքավայրեր և ընկերություններ փոքր չափի բիզնեսով են զբաղվում և օրինակ ինչպես է ձեզ մոտ և ինչ մտավախություններ կան արդյոք փոքր սեկտորը բաց թողնել EITI հաշվետվությունների մեջ։
Yeah, we referred to this question yesterday. The critical factor is the size of a payment. It doesn't matter the size of the business. If they make the multi-stakeholder group agrees a size of payments. So in most of Europe, the standard is 100,000 euros. So any company that makes a single payment in a year of 100,000 euros or more, or if it makes a series of payments of the same type within a year, totaling 100,000 euros or more, it has to report. It doesn't matter the size of the company. If it's a very big company that doesn't make any large payments in the year, it doesn't have to report. So that's the crucial thing.
That's a local decision what that threshold is.
Yeah, the multi-stakeholder group agrees the threshold.
In Armenia, we may decide it's 15,000.
Yeah.
Dollars.
Yeah, in fact, civil society, we originally sought a lower threshold to capture more payments, but the companies were arguing they only wanted 1 million euros or more. We wanted 10,000 euros, so we got 100,000, which is not too bad. Yeah. Yes.
Հասկանալի է, դուք իջացրել եք շեմը, բայց նրան
Yeah, yeah. Because you capture more information if it's a lower. Yeah.
I would like to ask in Armenia.
Please do.
Հետաքրքիր թեմա է, ինձ մի հարց է հետաքրքրում, այդ երկրները, որը նշվեց Ադալինը և այլն, նրանք չեն ընկնում մի շատ կարևոր կոնվենցիայի տակ, որը կոչվում է Access to Information, Public Participation and Access to Justice on Environmental Matters, կնապահանական։ Որտեղ ինքը ռեգիոնները, Մարտի եվրոպական տնտեսական հանձնաժողով։ Հիմա այդ դրույթները, որը կա կոնվենցիայի, օրինակ Անգլիայի համար, ինքը հետևում է, եթե կա contradiction, հակասություններ, եթե կա հակասություններ, Անգլիայի օրենսդրությամբ և կոնվենցիայի։ Եվ այդ երկրների ոնց է դուք այդ հարցը լուծում, որոշ դրույթներ կոնվենցիայում 5-րդ հոդվածում կա, որ կողմը պետք է ինքը հավաքագրի տեղեկատվությունը այդ ոլորտում ու առանց սպասելու հարցումների ինքը պետք է հասարակությանը դա տրամադրի, այսինքն դա իր պարտականությունն է, բայց հստակ օրենսդրական կարգավորումը այդ հարցի ազգային մենք դեռ չունենք, եւ դա այդ ձեր մոտեցումը շատ կարևոր է ազգային օրենսդրության զարգացման համար։
Okay, thank you. I cannot claim to know very much about the Aarhus Convention, except I understand it's about environmental information, I think. We have been discussing for the last 2 days, there is a big debate about how much the EITI report should disclose environmental and social information about the impacts of extractive industries. At present, under the standard, which is this document here, which you can access on the internet, the 26 standard and the previous standard, there is not a very strong requirement for environmental or social impact disclosure. It's quite weak. Many people in civil society wish to strengthen it, particularly, for example, in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, the Philippines. And in the Philippines, I believe that there's a very strong civil society coalition there. I think they have succeeded in introducing more environmental disclosure into the EITI process. There is nothing to stop you in Armenia achieving that if you can get the government and the companies to agree to it. The problem, very commonly, and we've had it in the UK, we have the government and the companies saying, we're going to do the standard, we will meet the requirements, but that's it. We're not going to go further because we haven't done it before, it's too difficult, and in our experience in the UK, you have to be pragmatic, and we decided, okay, let's meet the standard first, and then we can build on that. And that's happening globally, but it will take time. So, welcome Arthur, and
just to add,
yes.
There are countries which have included significantly more environmental impact information in their EITI. That was a national decision. Germany, for instance, this year joined the EITI. As part of their working plan, they have declared that environmental factors will be reported. So it's a local decision, it's a national decision. But my sense is in Armenia, we're going to see a lot of resistance to include that information in at least the first reporting. But as civil society, we have to try.
But the ambition is also there at the international level, because the EITI standard is agreed. The legislators, if you like, is the International EITI Board. On that international board, there is an equal representation of civil society at global level. So we have our own allies from civil society at international level pushing to extend and strengthen the standard. But just as at national level, at the global level, there is opposition from the companies and from the governments. They're saying it's too difficult, it's too expensive. So progress is slow, but progress has been made. So at the end of yesterday's session, there was a general view that we should this morning talk about the civil society protocol, which is this document here, which is actually included in the standard. I think we're on page 42. So you can download the standard and you will find on page 42 the civil society protocol. And there is a link to the standard here, and if you go to the EITI international website, you can find it. And this protocol, before we go into the detail, there was also a request that we talk about the experience of civil society in other countries with the EITI. And as I said previously, I know mainly about my own experience in the UK. People from the International Secretariat can help you a lot more with the experience in all the different 49 countries. So I can't tell you very much except what I happen to learn. But there is a document that we're also going to look at, which is this other document, which was an independent assessment of the functioning of multi-stakeholder groups all over the world. This was done published a year ago, February 2015, and there's a lot of examples there. And what's valuable about this for civil society, this was produced by an independent research unit, I think it was formerly associated with Harvard or Yale, I can't remember, which is called the Multi-Stakeholder Initiative Integrity, and it is very sympathetic to civil society. The perspective is one of benefiting civil society through the EITI and defending civil society. So we will speak about that also.
Were you looking at this report document?
This one, MSI, yeah, the cornerstone.
Where Moseberg said
protocol does not change, right?
Sorry?
No, we're not talking about this report. You were looking at this report, where Moseberg said that's not an EITI official report.
I cannot get the point.
And զեկույցը որ դու ցիտատարեցի իրանից Moseberg ասեց որ այս official EITI բան չի։ Էսա այս զեկույցն ավելի մոտ։
It's not an official report, but okay.
Developing multi-stakeholder group terms.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the summary of this.
That's not the
MSI
official,
integrity. No, it's not official. Anyway, we'll come on to talk about it. The last point I wanted to make before we get into the detail is, I think there was a view yesterday that we will not work for the full day today. We will not finish at 5. I have to leave at 4 because the UK Embassy has arranged for me to appear on television, which I'm very honoured to do, to speak a bit about the EITI and civil society. There was a view amongst some people that we might finish around 1 o'clock. I'm very happy to continue till 4 o'clock if anybody wants to stay at the table. So we'll see how it goes and see what we cover and see what the time is. So the first thing I thought we should look at, and the importance of this protocol, the civil society protocol, is that there has been a pattern of power relations within the EITI, both at national level and at global level, in which civil society, in some ways being the less powerful of the 3 stakeholder groups, has been marginalized. There have been either deliberate or accidental influences within the dynamics that have undermined civil society to an extent. So the importance of this protocol is this is a tool within the EITI recognized by all the parties that is designed to safeguard civil society participation. And as we constantly argue, without civil society there cannot be an EITI. The credibility of the EITI is about accountability to citizens, and civil society, which are people's organizations based on popular support, if you like. I mean, governments can claim the same thing, but civil society can claim its importance as a channel of accountability to citizens. So, the highlighted text here is just to show that the way... Is this lady a new participant?
She was there here
okay.
first day.
Okay, fine. Okay, thanks. Welcome. Okay. So, the text highlighted here, it stresses that the validator has to consider certain questions with regard to civil society participation. The importance of the validator is that it is the validator's role to make a recommendation to the EITI board whether a country is compliant or not, whether it achieves compliance status with the EITI. So if the validator is given a sense from civil society that civil society has not been able to fully participate for whatever reason, if it's important enough, the country will fail validation and will not be judged compliant. So we thought it would be helpful just to move quickly through this document, this part of the document. It's about 4 to 6 pages, I think. So firstly, references to civil society representatives. This means members of the multi-stakeholder group but is not limited to this. And what that means is, I mean, there are examples, countries, I don't know them all very well, or any of them very well. Azerbaijan is an example where some members of civil society who are active are persecuted by the government in one way or another. People are imprisoned, their funds are blocked, they have to leave the country, they are threatened or attacked. If members of civil society associated with the EITI have their freedom obstructed in any way, that is a reason why the country cannot be validated. And Azerbaijan, which was initially considered compliant, has been demoted to candidate status again until it can prove that civil society is free to operate. So that's not just members of the MSG, but it can be wider. So these are we move on to 2.1 is the areas of freedom that civil society has to be seen to enjoy in order for the process to be validated. So freedom of expression, I mean, these are really kind of civil and political rights in a lot of ways. Civil society representatives have to be able to freely engage in public debate. Freedom of operation, they have to be able to operate freely. For example, if the government blocks funding for NGOs, which happens in many countries, that is a reason to fail the EITI. So this is an important safeguard. If a country wishes to gain international approval as EITI compliant, it cannot also block NGOs funding from abroad, which is very useful. It's not just about funding, but regulatory restrictions, any kind of important restrictions. Here it says, any evidence suggesting that the fundamental rights of civil society representatives have been restricted with regard to the EITI is a reason for the country to fail validation. Freedom of association, so there has to be the ability to communicate and cooperate between the civil society group without any interference from the government, no restriction. Freedom of engagement with the EITI itself, so including in the design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation. So for example, your example yesterday where there was agreement that something would be in the work plan and then the government didn't do it or it wasn't done, this would infringe civil society's right to design, implement, monitor and evaluate. If the government said you can't mention that, you know, we will threaten if they threaten you. So there again, that would be a reason for the country to fail validation.
It's hardly because Armenia is not Azerbaijan, so.
I'm pleased to hear it. Yeah, I know. Okay, access to public decision making. So civil society representatives have to be able to speak publicly about the issues around the EITI without any restriction. And that again.
This is where we get into really muddy waters, a really confusing area with the confidentiality requirements of EITI. I think we need to have a lot more discussion internally to understand, even among MSG members, to understand how is this consistent with the confidentiality.
Yeah. I think, I mean, from the UK experience, for those who weren't here yesterday, also there was a lot of discussion about confidentiality. There is a confidentiality clause in the terms of reference for the UK multi-stakeholder group. We were discussing, well, what is that, a gagging order? Does that prevent any kind of freedom of speech? No. The principle is that if there's incidental information that you acquire by being around the table in the MSG, you have a responsibility to respect it if it's incidental and it's not material to the EITI. I mean, for example, in the UK, at the stage we have a draft report of the first report, and members of the multi-stakeholder group, we've been sent a copy, we've been asked not to share it with people outside the MSG because it's not finished yet. And, you know, to me it's not a problem. You need a degree of trust within the MSG. But this point about decision making, for example, we have a verbal agreement in the UK that as members of the multi-stakeholder group, my organisation, Publish What You Pay, we can say anything we like about the UK EITI process. I mean, if it's irresponsible, we will be criticised for it. But we cannot claim to be speaking on behalf of the multi-stakeholder group. That's the difference. We can speak on behalf of civil society, and the industry members can speak on behalf of industry and the government, etc. But if we want to speak on behalf of the multi-stakeholder group, there has to be agreement within the MSG. So again, I find that perfectly reasonable kind of, you know, there has to be an element of responsibility, perhaps. But I agree, there is a kind of, it's an area that needs to be thought through, really. So here, for example, civil society representatives are able to use the EITI process to promote public debate through public events and workshops and conferences. But if we held a civil society meeting and we said, industry, the people from industry involved in the UK extractives are all criminals and the government are all corrupt. I mean, our colleagues around the MSG, if they heard about it, they would be right to say, what kind of message are you giving out? Is this what you really believe, you know? So maybe that's not such a good example, but you know, one would need to be careful about the way these points are expressed. Okay, so paragraph.
If I could just
yeah.
I think one of the comments that was made, I think Collier himself made it in his talk. He said there's a tendency on the part of civil society to demonize all the sides, to demonize the other side. And I think this is a tendency that everyone has to restrict, and not to freely say, you know, you're corrupt, you're evil, you're just, you know, a grant eater or whatever. That tendencies we really have to control in building the trust.
But that doesn't mean that where you have proof that something illicit is happening, you shouldn't be able to challenge it, because you should. But that's different from challenge the action rather than the person, I think, is the critical element. Okay. So this is an instruction, 2.6 is actually an instruction to the validator and to the international board that actually makes the final decision about validation, that documentation from the multi-stakeholder group and the civil society organisations involved, as well as outcomes and consultation with stakeholders, including members of the MSG, should be taken into account when gathering the above evidence. It's the validator who gathers this evidence, principally, and then reports to a board committee which makes a recommendation to the board. So this is the mechanism by which civil society, if you have concerns about the process in your country, you can say to the validator when you reach that point, we don't think that our country is compliant with the standard because we have had all these restrictions imposed on us. That's a very important power that you have. Ultimately, you can stop Armenia being validated as compliant in 2 years' time, if you're justified, if you have enough evidence that civil society has been restricted. Obviously, we hope this won't happen, but as in any country, you could do it.
Maybe, I don't know if I should wait until the end or not. It seems like the validator has a very, sorry, I think this is a key question. It's all the question. Validator is a very key person. I mean, basically, whatever report they write is what the board, international board, sees. So if we have a problem with the validator is kind of anti-CSO. I mean, they're human beings. I mean, they have their own sentiments, they have their own proclivities towards things. Is there a kind of redress mechanism?
Yeah. I think one of the things that is quite helpful to look at, there is a slightly modified validation procedure now. Some of the initial data under the 2016 standard, this change was only made in Lima, the data gathering initially for validation is done by the International Secretariat. Now, in my view, my understanding, and that of many people in civil society, in the International Secretariat, there is a slight bias against civil society. And this is one reason why we were protesting in Lima. you know.
That was Claire Short or General?
The chair. No, the secretariat are the people who are the officials. So starting with Jonas Moberg, the head, Eddie Rich, the deputy head. Eddie Rich is an English guy. We know him well in the UK. Very nice person. But institutionally, we find that the International Secretariat, including the previous chair, who was also a British, Claire Short, a former government minister, civil society generally in the EITI, we have constantly felt there's a tendency to demonize civil society as irresponsible, not serious enough, etc. Yeah, troublemakers. So an important balance has to be struck. So under the new, maybe can we just look very briefly at the validation process, because I think that will be useful, and this document should outline the new process. And then we'll come back to validation and review, page 40, sorry. And then we'll come back to the protocol. It's true the validator does have huge potential influence, but ultimately it's a committee of the EITI board, including civil society members, who will make the recommendation to the full board.
But let's say MSG, civil society here in Armenia, has direct access to those individuals on the international board, right?
You can certainly,
we've seen the draft of the report.
Yeah.
We don't think this is right. Consider this in the final approval.
Yeah, that is definitely another channel. And the way this works, Publish What You Pay globally coordinates representation of civil society on the global board, and for every region there is a representative. So for example, my region is Europe and North America, and our main representative is a man called Danny Kaufman, don't know if you've heard him at Lima, who is the Executive Director of the Natural Resource Governance Institute, NRGI, former World Bank person, but he represents civil society, and before every EITI board meeting, he is obliged to hold a conference call for members of the Europe and North America constituency, so we can speak to him on the phone and say, he can say, these are the decisions coming up at the next board meeting, does anybody have any views, any concerns, and then we can say, well, on the UK, we know we're going to be validated, or there's a decision to be made, we're very unhappy with the process, etc., and it's his duty to represent our views. Now, I guess in Central Asia, I mean, you can look on the EITI website, and you can see who your board representatives will be on a regional basis. I suppose your Central Asia is...
No.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe. Okay. Well, in that case, you'll be part of Europe and North America. So we have a full representative as Danny Kaufman. I don't quite know how it's done, but the alternate on the board for our region is actually a woman from Transparency International Australia. I think Australia is grouped with the Europe and North America. Anyway, this is just to say that you have another channel, which is through the international board.
Is that the axis of wealth?
Possibly.
Sorry, you were thinking about that out of MSG, right? I mean, CSOs, which are not included in the MSG.
Yeah.
They can make alternative report.
Well,
persons asking not to validate this.
Express your views. I mean, I don't know the precise channels, how it would be done, but the point is that civil society at a global level has its own constituency, and we are all represented. But in order to connect with, you know, I'm just thinking about the mechanism. I mean,
Just charging for.
sure. The mechanism might be, well, my suggestion would be that as soon as you form your civil society constituency in Armenia, Publish What You Pay International. I work for the UK coalition, not for the international. But the international Publish What You Pay Secretariat has got 1, staff member who is responsible for coordinating civil society in the EITI. Her name is Esmara Klein, and she works in London. And as soon as you have your constituency formed, one of you should get in touch to make sure that you are included in all the communications that come from the Publish What You Pay Secretariat just for civil society in the global EITI. And there's plenty of information and opinion also, civil society positions, civil society, you receive reports of, receive reports of board meetings. Anyway, shall we just look quickly at the validation? What is the validation process? Because it's really important. So this is, again, in the EITI standard document. The objectives are to assess the performance of each participating country and to help the country develop and progress and learn, safeguard the integrity of the EITI, so make sure that the standard is not breached. If the standard is breached, you don't become compliant. So the idea is to have a common global standard, all very good. And the validation report addresses the impact of the EITI in the country, the implementation of activities, lessons learned, and any concerns stakeholders have expressed. So here, the validator is obliged to record if there are well-grounded concerns expressed by any party, the validator is obliged to record them. The methodology is set out in the validation guide. Okay, the procedure. Let's look at the procedure. This is slightly changed from this year. Initial data collection and stakeholder consultations are undertaken by the International Secretariat. As we said, many very good people in the International Secretariat, but institutionally there is a perception from civil society, or there is a risk of a slight bias against civil society. We have to guard against that. So they review the documentation, they visit the country and consult with stakeholders, meet with the multi-stakeholder group and the administrator, and then they prepare a report making an initial evaluation of progress against requirements in accordance with the evaluation guide, and there is a detailed guide which goes into more details. This does not include an overall assessment of compliance, but this report then goes to the validator. The validator is appointed by the International Secretariat and paid by the International Secretariat. I don't know who the validators are, I have no experience of them. It's probably possible to find out whether they are international accounting firms or specialists, I don't know. There's another stage, then that report then goes to the multi-stakeholder group. So you can formally, at your multi-stakeholder group meeting, you can say to government and industry, we as the civil society stakeholders, we don't agree with this report because it doesn't include this, or because it misstates something, there's factual inaccuracies, it's biased, etc. So you have an opportunity to resolve these issues within the MSG.
Sorry, am I right that validator is the same person as the auditor?
No. The auditor is called the independent administrator, but that's different. So there's two separate companies or individuals who come in. What you call the auditor, if you mean the one who reconciles the payments and revenues, no, that's a separate process. So in the UK we appointed Moore Stevens to be our independent administrators. So they help the MSG produce the report, but then it goes to another outside expert for the validation.
Was a tender process?
For independent administration, yes, there was a tender
What about
process.
validator?
I don't know. I'm afraid I can't help you. Maybe it's described somewhere on the EITI website in one of the guides, but that is the job of the International Secretariat. They organise it.
Okay, are there criteria regarding the selection of the
For the validator? I'm sure there must be, but I don't know what they
I
are.
think we should jot down this question
Yeah.
and then
It's
send
something
a
to look
set of
into.
questions to EITI
Yeah.
International.
Yeah, it's something to look into. Yes.
So does this auditor only work with papers and they are not meeting with the people and discussing?
Do you mean the validator?
No, I'm asking the
The
same question for both, the auditor and validator. Do they, what procedure do they use?
The independent administrator is basically, their job is to take the company payment, the company reports of payments, the government reports of revenues, and reconcile them. And where there are differences, then they have to speak to both parties and look at the figures and work out why they're reporting different figures. Sometimes they cannot reconcile them. If they cannot reconcile them, then they have to show in the report that certain figures have been not reconciled. It's also their job, the independent administrator, to help the MSG write and publish the report. So, for example, Moore Stephens, in other countries, they've done a lot of EITI reports in Africa. You know, there's this context chapter, which is now very important under the standard. There's quite a long chapter describing the sector and, you know, the volumes and the value and exports and geographical distribution, employment, legislative framework, fiscal framework. In some countries, the independent administrator writes that, Moore Stephens writing. In the UK, we decided to write it within the MSG. Sometimes I wish we hadn't because it was very difficult, but we wrote it in the MSG. But the independent administrator has to kind of edit the report and format it, present it to the MSG and say, are you happy with this? You know, is anything you want to change? And they make recommendations. In the UK case, they also came to MSG meetings and some of the subgroup meetings to discuss details. The validation process is different because it involves, so with the validation process, so data collection and stakeholder consultation are done by the Secretariat.
What data?
Sorry?
What type of data?
They have to assess the report. Does the report meet all the requirements of the standard? That's absolutely crucial. They have to maybe check that there was an adequate work plan. It's really assessment of the report, I would say, because the country is judged on the report and the process. So that the Secretariat then produces a report which goes to the validator. Okay, now let's see what the task, how the validator works. Okay, so the validator has to assess whether the Secretariat's initial validation has been carried out in accordance with the guide, with the rules. Has there been a detailed desk review of the documentation for each requirement, principally the EITI report? They're meant to make spot checks, and they're meant to consult with stakeholders. Then the board, and I'm not quite sure about the timing of this process, the board may request the validator to undertake spot checks on particular requirements. For example, the board may get a view, and I think by board it means the validation committee. They may think that the EITI report is inaccurate about the fiscal regime. They may just get a sense, we don't think that the fiscal regime is properly covered in this country. So they will ask the validator to look into that, for example. So the validator will amend or comment on the Secretariat's report, then prepare a short summary, which is known as the validation report, which goes to the board. Again, I think this goes to the validation committee of the board, on which there are civil society representatives. And this will include the validator's assessment of compliance with all the provisions, but not an overall assessment of compliance. So the validator will go through the standard, basically, and for every one of the numbered requirements set out in the contents. So we're talking about requirements 3.1 to 3.7. For each one of those requirements, the validator will have to say, in my view, or in our view if it's a company, Armenia is compliant with requirement 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 to 3.7. Assume all of them. And the validation report also then goes to the multi-stakeholder group, which is given a chance to comment on it. So that if the validator decides that the country is not compliant, the multi-stakeholder group can challenge that view. And also, if the validator decides that the country is compliant, but say a civil society in a multi-stakeholder group, you consider that there's been an important requirement has not been met, you can raise this, you can challenge it at that point. So then at that point, the validation committee of the board reviews the validator's assessment and any feedback from the multi-stakeholder group. Clearly, you would need to reach agreement within the group if you are going to make feedback to the board committee.
But there's also independent reports that if we're not happy with any of the process, we can send them to our colleagues and CSO.
Yeah, I mean, how it would work in practice, I don't know. But I mean, you know, I guess the first thing is you would alert civil society board representatives, which would basically be for your Danny Kaufman and his alternate, that the process is not going right, that there's something wrong with the process, you feel the validation has been too generous, that there has been a problem and nobody's acknowledged it. He may say, send me a report. Unfortunately, because of the way civil society works, very often, I mean, for Lima, we had the telephone call on the Friday. Some people were already traveling. Many of us were traveling on the Saturday. There was very little time. That's the problem with the way this whole initiative runs, is everybody's under so much time pressure that very often things happen but a bit too late at the last minute. And that's something we all have to improve. So he may say, well, send me something in writing, but you have to send it, you know, within 12 hours because the board meeting is tomorrow. That could easily happen. Sometimes you have to act very quickly. But he is the channel, and you know, the board, the international board, is there to represent our interests. Civil society members are there to represent our interests and our perspectives, and if they don't do that, then they don't deserve to be our representatives. So then the validation committee of the board is the one that makes the recommendation to the full EITI board whether the country is compliant or not. And then the full EITI board makes the final decision at one of its board meetings. I don't think that happens between board meetings. So that's the validation process. So in principle, there are checks and balances. There is the secretariat compiles the data, then you get a sight of that and you can challenge that. The validator drafts a report, you get a sight of that report and you can challenge that. And then the board committee makes a decision and you have some ability to influence the views of your board representative. So in theory, there should be an adequate number of balances to enable the right conclusions to be reached, even allowing for an institutional bias sometimes against civil society in the secretariat. And we have a new chair now. The chair, Fredrik Reinfeldt, is a former Prime Minister of Sweden. He was appointed in 2016. Our view generally in civil society is we have an open mind. He showed that he was willing to listen to our concerns in Lima. The previous chair did not have a very good track record of openness to civil society, and in the end I think she showed that she was slightly hostile, but it doesn't mean the new chair will be the same. So we're hopeful that, you know, the chair will not want to repeat some of the embarrassing things that have happened recently in the EITI.
If I could just make a comment on the new chair. We're working with Swedish colleagues on this World Bank report, and one of our Swedish Geological is the prime contractor. And one of the comments after I mentioned that he's been selected, when I was communicating with our colleague over there, and saying, could you ask him why, when he was a prime minister, he refused Sweden to join the EITI?
Well, it may be. Has Sweden got much mining?
Yes.
They do have, yeah. Because the UK used to refuse to join on the grounds that it was not classified by the IMF as a resource-rich country. You know, it's a question of the contribution of in this sector to it was considered important.
The EITI was pushed by UK president.
Yeah, Prime Minister Blair, that's right. But the UK didn't want to participate, and NGOs have been saying for years it's hypocritical. You want all these other countries to follow the standard, but you're not willing to do it yourself. But now, I mean, under the current government, they were willing to do it. So that's validation. We were just looking then quickly, completing this look at the civil society protocol, so there's this paragraph 2.6 basically summarizes the kind of information that needs to be taken into account by the International Secretariat, by the validator, ultimately by the EITI board. And then it talks about, gives examples of some of the restrictions on civil society that will be material factors in judging whether the country is compliant or not. And this is based on experience of the kind of restrictions on civil society that have happened in Azerbaijan and elsewhere. I mean, in Niger, for example, some civil society campaigners were imprisoned temporarily during the visit from the French president because they were criticizing the relationship, the government deal with the French company Areva for the uranium, which was very untransparent, and they were demanding transparency. And some of them were put in prison for about 12 days or something like that. I mean, that's an example of ad hoc restrictions, quite severe ones. So the EITI board now has a rapid response committee, which is designed to investigate these particular cases where there are breaches of the principles, and was asked to respond in Azerbaijan, and Claire Short, the chair of the EITI globally, visited Azerbaijan and met with the president. I'm not sure she had any influence.
The Azeri CSO representatives were saying after her visit, nothing changed.
Yeah. I think there was a concern from civil society that other members of the global board were being too soft, and Azerbaijan definitely. It was the first country that ever became compliant, and yet, as we know, there's huge questions around corruption in the oil and gas industry there. So, I mean, this now goes into more detail about what actions the EITI board could take, and we don't need to go into detail there. So that's the civil society protocol, and I hope it answers some of the questions and doubts people have raised here in the last 2 days about the position of civil society and what leverage there is available. You know, there's quite a lot of machinery there that should enable, won't be easy, but should enable you to defend your space and defend your participation in the EITI. Any questions or comments on the discussion so far?
I want to know what is the legal significance of this paper, this protocol.
Okay.
Member Secretariat says that it's not the official document.
No, it's not. This comes from, this is associated with this document, which is MSI Integrity. Can I just see that one? I'm not that familiar with it. Okay, so this organization, MSI Integrity, as an independent institute for multi-stakeholder initiatives. And it tells you here about this. It's a non-profit, so it's basically part of civil society itself, dedicated to the understanding of human rights impact and value of voluntary initiatives that address business and human rights. It's a very small group of 1 or 2 people, this institute. They were formerly associated with Yale University, I think. They were asked to produce this report by Publish What You Pay. The report was paid for by the World Bank, and it was Publish What You Pay globally asked for it because of concerns about the governance of the EITI globally and within countries. That not everything is going the right way, that in some countries the MSG, for example, in some countries civil society MSG representatives are appointed by the government. That's a breach of the standard, because civil society is meant to be completely independent. In some countries the government says we'll have 1 person from the trade unions, 1 from the religious organizations, and 2 NGOs. You bring us the people. In the United States even, the government has to approve the selection by civil society. The UK's been very good, the government's not interfered in any way. So this is the same date as this document, February 2015. So I assume, and this document may be in there actually, may be part of this document. Let's just have a look, and then I can tell you more. Protocol. I don't see it in the contents. Yes, it's here. Protocol, right. So this document that you have, Artur, is part of this larger document. So basically, what
is the significance of this document?
Okay, this is what I'm going to introduce. So, and the reason I'm suggesting this for two reasons. One is it highlights good and bad practice in the EITI, in whatever country there is, particularly from a perspective of civil society. Not only, but it's mainly about where civil society is able to operate freely in accordance with the protocol and where it is not. And Publish What You Pay invited these people, MSI Integrity, to produce this document, to research it out of concern that things are not going so well in the MSGs and at the global level, and this was paid for by the World Bank. So this has the status of an independent report, commissioned, paid for by the World Bank, encouraged by Publish What You Pay in order to improve the functioning of the EITI, make sure that multi-stakeholder groups do what they're meant to do, which is operate on a tripartite basis with equal partnership, and that the same happens at the global level. And the other reason for my suggestion that we look briefly at this document today, we can't look at all the detail, is that people were asking me, can you give examples of different countries in the EITI, what's been working well, what's not working well. I don't really know that, but this document gives some useful examples that I think we can helpfully look at. So, do you have a particular question now on this?
Yeah,
okay.
So, this document was formed. So we can say that this is the point of view of civil society on the matters of the EITI, how to deal with it.
In many ways, yes, I think we can say that.
And this is this shows the kind of good practice.
Yeah.
From the point of view of civil society.
Yes.
Again.
Yes.
Okay. So one more issue in here. Here's referring the decision-making procedure, and it's referred to the standard 1.3, the article 1.3G, but I cannot find.
That's because this is referring to the 2013 standard, and they've renumbered it. But I can look for it. I can look for it.
But it's very,
What's
very
it about?
important.
What's the content?
Important thing is here. So it's written that EITI standard requirement 1.3G, which says that the multi-stakeholder group is required to agree clear public terms of reference for its work, and the term agree in this document is interpreted as the decision-making via consensus, but not decide, but agree.
Okay.
So this is very principal point for us. No, not decide, but to agree. Yeah. So this decision is a decision can be via voting as well, but the agreement actually.
Yeah. I would say it's quite possible that the authors of this document have not thought as closely about this as you, at the difference. It may be just the use of a word without too much precision.
But it is clearly defined here that at least the terms of reference shall be agreed by consensus.
Okay, right.
The interpretation of the standard, and there is no the standard, and point the standard in here. Again, that requirement, 1.3G, I cannot find here in this.
Right, yeah, but okay, so let's look in the 2016 standard. Okay, look, the multi-stakeholder group is required to agree clear terms of reference. It's now a 1.4b, but it's there. 1.4b. The multi-stakeholder group.
Yeah.
So they've actually used the same language about agreement.
Just change the article, the point.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What they did with the new standard, the 2016 standard, is they reordered the requirements to reflect the chronology of a country going through the EITI process. The previous document didn't have that organization, but the content should be the same or stronger.
Good, thank you. So anyway, we can point this provision or interpretation during our discussions with the government.
Sure. I mean, refer to the standard print, I would. First thing, because what you may get is the government will say, well, what is the status of this MSI integrity document? You don't need to, you say it's in the standard, we have to do it here. Yeah. Shall we take a 5-minute break and then we'll start looking a bit more at the MSI integrity report and see what's useful in it? Great.
Yes, we could say that's a good concern. Okay.
Ես իմիշ պրոստը հիշատակ Հայաստանից եկալով հայ ամենասիմվոլիկով Ղարաբաղը չեմ մոռացել, մեկը փոքր ու յանում եթե Հայաստանը Ղարաբաղը
կանաչացնես այդ տղա։
Okay, so I think what I suggest we do in the next session, we will move swiftly through this document, and then where there are issues.
I'm calling him, sorry.
Okay, and where there are issues of particular importance, or you want to ask a question, just raise the point and ask a question. So this was a review of internal governance of multi-stakeholder groups in 41 implementing countries, conducted in early 2014. And these are the key findings, selected key findings by the team that did the assessment. So the first one they found is that less than 2/3 of all EITI implementing countries publish the terms of reference or other core governance documentation. And for those who were here yesterday, you've seen that the UK terms of reference are published there and published on websites. So the team were unable to assess a number of implementing countries in terms of the quality of the terms of reference. They didn't have publicly accessible governance documents, and they did not respond to requests for access to the material. And this is a clear breach of both the EITI rules and the standard, which require countries to agree public terms of reference. So the researchers of this report were simply acting in the position of any citizen should be able to go online, or at the worst send an email or contact a national secretariat to obtain the terms of reference. They were not able to do that. They found that not a single country included all the internal governance expectations in requirement 1.3. Now these references are to the previous EITI standard 2013, so the requirement numbers may not be that helpful. I'm afraid that well, they do spell out the details. So the requirements require to agree to keep written records of MSG discussions. And I know that there are countries involved in the EITI, Niger is one, because I've worked a little bit with the coalition in Niger, where you can't get hold of minutes. Members of the MSG are unable to get hold of minutes of the MSG meetings. And these minutes should be publicly available, or an inclusive decision-making process. Only 41% of countries included provisions regarding nominating or changing MSG representatives. Only 59% had rules limiting the duration of elected representatives on the MSG. And their conclusion of these researchers was that the EITI standard does not provide sufficient internal governance requirements. And that's one thing that this report tries to suggest, what is required beyond the EITI standard if the national MSG is to work well. One of their concerns was accountability for national secretariats. We discussed this a little bit yesterday. I mean, the experience that I'm familiar with, as I described, the National Secretariat in the UK was appointed by the government department. They are paid by the government, but we have never had a problem with them. We like them as individuals. We don't detect any bias in their work. They are competent people and so on. But you maybe shouldn't assume that that will always be the case. And for those who weren't here yesterday, there was a discussion. The government wishes to appoint 2 external consultants to act as the Secretariat, and there was the view that civil society should be consulted in the selection process and is now going to be included. I think that's right. So your Secretariat should be accountable to the MSG, and through the MSG accountable to every constituency. So if the Secretariat is not producing minutes in a timely fashion, or the minutes of the meetings are inaccurate, or they ignore important points raised at the meeting, you have a right to hold them to account. Guarantees of stakeholder independence. So the authors of this report are suggesting there should be conflict of interest policies for MSG members. I can't remember if there is such a policy in the UK.
What does that mean? Because mining companies are representing mining interests.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
what is conflict of interest?
for example, supposing you had, in a not totally hypothetical example, a so-called civil society representative who was being paid by an investor for purely profit reasons to share information with them. That would be a conflict of interest. Or a member of civil society who also works part-time as a consultant for an oil company or a mining company. And there are examples of consultants who work both for civil society and for the private sector, or for the government sector. I would say that would be a conflict of interest. Or an MSG representative from the government who is a shareholder in a mining company, or whose wife or husband is a shareholder. That would be a conflict of interest.
So within their groups, they have to have no conflict of interest.
Well, within the MSG as a whole, I would say. I mean, yeah. I mean, if they're representing industry, they shouldn't have any government interests, and vice versa, or with civil society.
We've discussed this in our meetings, CSO meetings. Sometimes it becomes very, very confusing, how the lines are drawn.
Yeah.
Because we've had people who work for mining companies, they don't anymore, but they're CSOs now. We've got CSOs that are funded by mining companies, not completely, but certain activities. We've got CSOs that are funded by government. Yeah. So it gets very, very confusing.
It can do. I mean, for example, in the UK civil society constituency, we have Transparency International UK. I mean, everybody, as far as I know, in civil society respects Transparency International. But in the UK chapter, they have a small amount of funding actually comes from oil companies, because they run something called a business integrity program, which is a forum in which the companies come together to discuss issues of you know, corruption and so on, misuse of funds, bribery. So, I mean, I guess a rule of thumb, in fact there was a vote was taken at the Publish What You Pay Global Assembly in Lima before the EITI meeting about whether members of Publish What You Pay should accept any funding from the extractive companies themselves. And the view was that the coalition as a whole should not accept funding, but if I recall, it wasn't a binding vote, that there is a view that an NGO, a civil society organisation, could conceivably have a small amount of funding from industry, from the extractive sector, for a particular purpose, without necessarily compromising. But you would have to work this out at a country level. And I don't think we've worked it out very closely at a UK level. But again, the suspicion generally hasn't arisen. Just another point on codes of conduct. I think there's another important document. There is an EITI code of conduct available on the website, which is really about the limits of interpersonal behaviour amongst EITI officers, including members of the MSG, which if there were one of your number, and this is an experience we have in the UK unfortunately, we have a member of the civil society representation whose interpersonal behaviour is quite hostile to other people, and this is actually a breach of the code of conduct, and we are currently thinking how we're going to deal with that. So there is that document. So then there's a requirement about transparency and accessibility of MSG activities to the public. So half the countries did not publish or provide a current list of their MSG members. And maybe for the people who were not here yesterday, and I think this is, in this case, it is quite a good example of UK practice. If you go to the UK EITI website, I'll just yeah, but that's okay. Oh, sorry, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, I would say this is an example of good practice, and you know, not everything done in the UK is good practice. So, on this is a UK government website, so you have the role of the multi-stakeholder group, who the members are, and it lists all the members from the chair, the champion, the industry members, civil society members, government members, alternate members. The terms of reference, that's the document we looked at yesterday. Information, where to get further information from government office. The minutes of the different meetings for the last year, and you can go back earlier. The objectives of the EITI, the candidacy application form, the work plan, activity report, guidance provided for the industry to report, communications plan and events. So that's a pretty good comprehensive window. There are much better ones. If you go to the United States website, it not only tells you about the multi-stakeholder group, but it starts telling you about the extractive industries in the US, and it's really fascinating with all sorts of interactive features and data there. The Norwegian website is also very good. Okay, so we're now talking about the findings of this research. And an important one, governance processes are failing to ensure the independence and effectiveness of civil society. So they found in at least 7 out of 15 multi-stakeholder groups, the government was involved in the selection of civil society representatives that may have undermined the possibility of independent and effective representation. So that is a breach of the EITI standard in itself. And if that happens, there is no way that the country should be judged compliant. And this could be done by the government predefining the type of civil society organisations that may participate. I'll give you an example. Or the government may choose an inappropriate organisation to select CSO representatives. which could be a problem. If there was a government-funded NGO, and the government said, okay, we want you to choose the representatives, that would automatically restrict the freedom of civil society to I mean, we're fortunate in the UK because the government says there's no money, civil society has to do it itself, and so on, and they haven't interfered in any way. Okay? So they've found other processes within the MSG that may undermine civil society independence. For example, now in countries where civil society groups are not well funded, in the UK we're fortunate that most civil society groups are well funded, there's the cost of travelling to MSG meetings for CSOs based in extractive regions, or the need for internal technical capacity. Now, I don't know what the answer is to that, but under the EITI requirements, under the standard, the MSG is meant to consider what constraints there are on proper participation. So, I mean, they're suggesting that there's an issue of reimbursement available for MSG members who need to travel to the large cities for MSG meetings. Okay, sorry, okay, yeah, okay. So there's the issue of possible reimbursement. That's been a controversial issue because in some countries the government is paying, as I mentioned yesterday, has been paying very high per diems to civil society representatives, so much that it makes civil society compete because it's a good way of earning a living or earning some money if you're on the MSG. So that's a kind of corrupted incentive in itself. So there is now an EITI global rule about the level of per diems, and they should not be excessive.
But you do not have a per diem?
No, not in the UK, there's nothing.
It's not a requirement that you have it.
I don't know, it's possible. Possibly not until now, because it's only now as part of the standard, I think. There's now a kind of protocol. So here it says they report that.
But isn't there a risk that this and civil society is, you said corrupted, but even not only competing for the positions, but also buying their voice?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, there is that risk.
Their voice, so you're threatened, being cut off from the money if you don't behave this way, if you don't vote this way. That's not a good practice. No. Of course, there's the opposite problem. In many countries, it's really difficult for civil society to participate. It's expensive, there's travel costs, and so on. But there is, I'm sorry that Noreen is not here, because there is a World Bank coordinated multi-donor trust fund, which is partly, I think, intended to support civil society where there are real constraints on participation. And I know, because I've worked on this with others in Publish What You Pay, some coalitions, some civil society coalitions through Publish What You Pay apply for funding in order to support their participation in the EITI. So apply to any donor, independent sources of funding. They also found that civil society are not adequately utilising internal governance processes. Just looking at the detail of this one, civil society representatives sometimes do not work together. That's really important. They do not seek to ascertain in advance the views of their wider constituency. One thing we do in the UK is a week before every multi-stakeholder group meeting, the multi-stakeholder group representatives make themselves available either on the telephone or in a meeting, face-to-face meeting, with the rest of our constituency, saying we're going to have the multi-stakeholder group next week, these are the issues coming up, this is what happened at the last one, let's just ask us, are there points that you're concerned about, things that you want to know more about, things you want us to raise at the MSG. It's not a very active process, unfortunately, in the UK, but the structure is there, and there needs to be something like that. The problem of CSO representatives becoming divided into factions or isolated is, and we actually have got that problem in the UK. I mean, we believe that the person who claims to be a CSO is not really a CSO, but it's somebody who is now
part of our network and acting in a hostile manner. So really important the way civil society organises itself and makes sure that you have to reach agreement within your own constituency if you are to have a strong and effective voice.
Just quickly, we've gone through 3 months of a process, a very open process in Armenia, where we've, everyone who's expressed any interest in EITI has been regularly updated. We've had meetings here, we've met, and civil society decided on procedures for participation, voting procedures and protocols for participation, and we've even had discussions on agenda items of what civil society as a group wishes to advance, and there have been very kind of in-depth discussions. So I think on that part, civil society has been, those who have expressed interest have participated very intensively. Twice a week there have been meetings for the past 3 months. There's a massive investment.
Yeah. Okay. And they also talk about the importance of decision-making processes being agreed in writing. In the UK context, we didn't have that, and our experience was quite negative because basically we had an opposition member of parliament as part of the civil society constituency, which is within the EITI rule, not a member of the government, but a parliamentarian who had an interest in these issues. And without us realising what was happening, and we only have a small network of 30 to 40 people representing civil society organisations, this particular person, in the space of a week, arranged for 10 personal supporters, 8 to 10, I think it was 8 actually, to join our network as individuals. All we know about them is a name and an email address. This coincided with a vote for new representatives on the MSG. We'd never had tactical voting or anything. Suddenly, these individuals and him all voted for 2 new people. One became a full representative on the MSG with very little background in these issues. Another person became an alternate because we didn't have a rule. We sensed it was an irregularity. In fact, personally, I think some of these individuals who voted are not people. They are just a Gmail address, so with a name, so you can't actually check whether it's a person or not. So through this mechanism, and when we delayed to agree the result, he kept saying, well, were any rules broken? But we didn't have any rules. So it is very important to think through these issues. Maybe this is a useful moment to introduce you to, and again, it's not because it's what we do in the UK is it good, but it's grown out of very negative experience. I'm not going to, for some reason my document's been corrupted, but I can get this from the web. If you just bear with me for a moment, because I think it's a useful document to look at. I did include the link.
What was the aim, the goal of those patients?
We don't know, but we suspect this person who was a member of parliament, he's not a member of parliament anymore. Either we suspect he has a secret source of funding, because he's also operating now at the global level and caused a lot of problems at the global conference. We suspect either it's that, or it's sheer egotism. He sees it as a way of getting power or influence, which is ridiculous, because there is no real power or influence beyond the work of the EITI. But
you may have contacts with the companies.
yeah, we think he has contacts in Africa. We think he has contacts. He claims to have contacts in Africa. I mean, he's a British man. He's a white British man. He claims that most of Publish What You Pay, we are white racists, and that we claim to be speaking for Africans, but we're not Africans. It's a very,
And yet he can speak.
He claims to speak. I just want to show you this document. Sorry, it's taking a moment. Oh, okay. Let's just take a moment.
I think we've been much smarter in setting up rules of participation.
If you've already got those rules, that's absolutely good.
Well, I mean, we'll have to continue. to continue and make sure, be very vigilant that at least the CSO participation is not infiltrated by.
We have similar problems.
Yeah.
And some members of government and companies may push their own loyal with their policies members to civil society in order to push their agenda.
So let me just share this document with you, and we produced this document because we realized that if you are willing to admit any individual, we took a decision that it's right for individuals to be part of the civil society coalition, because you can't say, no, you're not qualified to belong. But therefore, we decided that those individuals cannot be able to influence the decisions of civil society unless you know who they represent. Because like with this man, nobody knows who he represents. Whereas if you have Global Witness or Transparency International or Oxfam, you know who they represent. You know who their donors are, you know who their board members are, you know that the staff member is accountable to their management and so on. So we took the definition of civil society from the EITI, which is available to everybody, and we set up a 2-membership structure. This is only a 2-page document, so it won't take very long. So we decided that full membership is only open to civil society organizations. So each organization has a representative and they have a vote. Associate membership is open to any individual who wants to be part of it but who doesn't represent a civil society organization. And that's the basic principle. And then decisions are made by a majority of the full members on the basis of 1 vote per CSO. So we know exactly who is accountable in the voting process. We have Global Witness, we have Christian Aid, we have Oxfam, we have Transparency International and a number of others. And we know where those people are coming from, we know who funds them, etc. But we don't allow an individual who says, oh, I'm just an individual interested in these issues, I'm not associated with anything, because you can't trust them. And you may get a case where an individual is coming in with underhand motives, and there's no way of knowing that. So I just suggest this, and maybe you've already covered this ground and got something like this or even better.
It's very useful for us to look at this document. We've come up with rules, probably not as sophisticated as this. We need to look at it. But
these are actually quite basic.
One of the issues we have, for instance, the Orbis centers in Armenia. There are how many of them? 15 of them throughout Armenia. And they started suddenly showing up and showing interest, and MSG was going to be occupied by all of our center representatives. So it was a question whether it's one organization can vote or,
Absolutely. Well, we also made this rule because now this former member of parliament in the UK, he and his supporters now occupy 2 of the 4 full places and 2 of the 4 alternate places. But yet there's 20 other NGOs in our network who don't have any representation. So we included this rule that only the official representative or another person they nominate from the same CSO can stand for election to the multi-stakeholder group as a full representative or alternate. And only the official representative or a nominated proxy can vote in those elections, 1 vote per CSO, and that one CSO is only entitled to hold at any one time at most 1 full representative on 1 alternate position. So no organisation member can dominate the membership of the MSG.
So you have a network.
We created a network. It's basically just an email list.
We have that network.
Yeah, it's an email list. And
130 people on
it. Yeah, but we have one more criteria to participate in one session concerning the
to be able to participate in MSG.
Yeah,
you can be part of the network, whoever is interested. We just don't have a category of full member versus associate member. We don't have that.
I would just suggest you need to think very carefully. Basically, what this man did, he turned our network into a political party. In a political party, you go behind the scenes and you gather up your supporters and you win the vote. But this is not politics in that sense. So if you've got 130 members, you need to protect yourself against a group within that organising who you may not know, or they may just be a name on an email list. And I think, and this has happened in other places. There are much more sophisticated rules, and the one that I put a link in the agenda to is in Democratic Republic of Congo, where they also had problematic individuals, unaccountable individuals. they introduced a lot of criteria about funding, where your funding comes from, and if your organisation is funded by the private sector or government, you have to declare it. We haven't gone down that route, but you know, some people have, certainly. So if we continue with the lessons from this example, I'm just trying to see what's most useful. Okay. So this is the MSG decision-making processes. So we looked at the terms of reference from the UK yesterday. And the view of the researchers of this report was that the International Secretariat, eager to make the MSG successful, does not require very strict internal governance procedures. So the standard, I mean, it's become better now, but it was not strict enough. And it's similar because one of the suspicions that civil society has about the International Secretariat, they would like to see the EITI have 100 countries in it, not just 40, 50. They want it to be big, they want it to be impressive, and at the risk, we think, of weakening the standard. They would like it to be like the Global Compact, where any company can join, you know, you don't have to go to very strict procedures. So, you know, there is it's just another thing to guard against, is having the MSG procedures too flexible, too informal, that things can go wrong. And here's some more examples. MSG members reported they were not given adequate notice of meetings. Meetings were too short or infrequent. And I've heard, for example, in Niger, the civil society representatives don't know when the next meeting will be. Suddenly the government calls a meeting. There may not be a meeting for 4 months, and suddenly there'll be a meeting. I mean, the UK, again, is quite good in this respect. We know every 2 months there's a meeting. I already have the dates for the rest of 2016. And at the end of 2016, we'll get all the dates for 2017. So we can plan ahead.
People have to travel from the regions. They need to know.
Surely. Yeah. In some cases, decision-making is closed, brushed, or ill-informed. And, you know, again, if civil society is unhappy about the way a decision is made, you should make that clear. Underrepresentation in areas of extractive activity. And here, I mean, this is not a relevant concern in the UK because we don't really have communities affected by negatively by extractive activity, but here in Armenia it sounds like we very much do. So it's for civil society to find ways to include the perspectives of people living or operating in regions with extractive activity, particularly, I would say, affected communities. And I don't know how successful that's been here so far, outreach to mining affected communities. Has that happened?
Well, the civil society itself has outreached a bit, but also government has gone around and met in communities with the World Bank and informed them of what is going on. So it's been, I think there's been satisfactory. Yeah,
but it's probably civil society's role more than anybody. I mean, the government will claim to do it through the kind of the, you know, the democratic machinery, but it sounds like civil society.
We didn't want to show up with government.
Sure.
In those meetings, so they were going to do it anyway. So let's, you know.
Yeah, but you need to be sure that if those people's perspectives are being reflected through the political process or not, and if they're not, then I guess it's for civil society to do that. Well, it's not for me to tell you how to do it, but that would be my view. Okay. So they're suggesting there should be direct inclusion of locally affected stakeholders on the MSG. Again, we don't really have that issue in the UK because the big industry is offshore, but that's something to think about. The importance of liaising with your constituency, and I gave the example of what we do in the UK. So we have, we're trying to make, our network is smaller than yours, but we have a problem of lack of people wanting to join the network for good reasons. But we still keep reaching out to other organisations, and we say, if you know people who are interested, please join, and we will have a meeting a week before the next MSG. And on our email list, we always send them updates from the previous MSG and so so that's really important. They are suggesting potential innovations include subnational EITI councils, and that's happening in some countries. In Peru, they are now developing subnational EITIs. So, for example, if you've got a particular region that is affected by mining, you at that local level you bring together local government, local civil society, and the companies operating in that region, and you have meetings and dialogue that feed into the global process. Another important one, lack of gender diversity. We haven't been very successful in the UK in being very gender diverse, but they have found that in many MSGs there are no female representatives. So the next set of points under number 4 were criticisms of the way that EITI globally monitors the work of MSGs at the national level, and a lot of that has now been addressed with the civil society protocol and the modified validation process. So they were recommending a more comprehensive validation methodology and set of criteria. Well, they're talking about the selection of validators, okay, and this is a point that somebody else raised. I don't know what's happening on that. They recommended that. They recommended there should be a grievance mechanism. Well, there isn't really a grievance mechanism formally, but I've mentioned how we have got channels through our representatives on the board to raise concerns. I think maybe we'll pass that one. So their main recommendations were that MSGs must develop comprehensive internal governance processes, must be able to resource, no, sorry, these are for the EITI globally, so maybe we can skip those and look at the multi-stakeholder groups in each country. So there need to be good governance rules and procedures and frameworks. These need to be formally documented.
That's part of the working plan that you say for the first year working plan, first year period. You say, we're going to develop these we're going to make this decision and document it and publish it.
Yeah, yeah. Terms of reference will be the starting one. And there are these various source documents that you can access. Protocol for developing terms of reference. I think, is that this one? Yeah, which is actually in this document, an annex. Publish this information in an accessible format. So all core governance got documents, current lists of members, annual budget, and audited financial accounts. That doesn't happen in the UK. There's a very small budget for the Secretariat. It's not done. Records of discussions and decisions, announcements of meeting details. That's not done in the UK. But for example, in the United States, if you go onto the US EITI website, members of the public are actually given a telephone number. You can dial in and listen to the MSG meeting. That's really, real openness there. It's really good, I think. In the United States, if you look at the US EITI website, it's very good in that respect. Dispute resolution procedures. I'm not sure whether we've got that in the UK.
I mean, if you do that, the confidentiality issues are...
I don't know how they deal with that in the US, but it's a concern, certainly.
So they will not talk about incidental things, I guess.
Yeah, they will focus on what...
But if a member of the public wants to listen in the US, are they asked to agree that? I don't know. But it's worth thinking about. Outreach. Strategies for outreach and liaising with the public and external stakeholders. We're not brilliantly successful so far in the UK at that. The MSG is meant to identify barriers to meaningful participation of civil society and taking steps to overcome these barriers. So that might be a funding issue. And then they make these recommendations for civil society themselves. Establish a wide network of individuals, communities and organisations. It sounds like you're well on the way to doing that. Liaise regularly. It sounds like you've been doing that. Establish parameters, and if you've got some kind of initial terms of reference, that's good. A code of conduct. Well, there is a global EITI code of conduct. which you can draw on. You need to clarify your nomination and selection processes. And again, ours were very weak in the UK, and that's how we got into this very difficult position.
One question, and I don't know if we've discussed this and what conclusion we came to. If a civil society member elected through the process that this network has set up, is misbehaving, is there a recall?
Well, you can create one.
So we ask that this person doesn't represent civil society anymore.
Yeah, you might have to formalize it, because if this person has got personal supporters in your network, they may say, no, I'm not going. And we've got that issue in the UK network now. So, and as I think we looked at, I showed you on the MSG terms of reference in the UK, there is now a clause that a representative can be removed if their conduct is considered, detrimental to the work of the MSG as a whole.
And for that, I think the way we said how we define that is there's a platform that civil society members agree with. If that person starts deviating from that platform, that would be the basis for it.
Yeah, could be, or it could be maybe other, well, it could be conflict of interest. I mean, the devil is in the detail with these kind of processes, but yeah, I mean, we also had that with this individual, that the rest of us had agreed a policy on beneficial ownership, and at the next MSG meeting he said he didn't agree with it, and then he told us afterwards in an email we should have consulted with him first. Well, we organised the meeting, he didn't bother to attend it, so all sorts of things are possible.
I see that in the UK there is no such a mechanism.
Well, for the MSG there is. And we talked about putting it into these membership principles. All we put in here was that civil society network members are expected to observe the high standards of ethics and integrity in line with the EITI Association Code of Conduct. And that is the sort of global code that is available that you can, I mean, we considered having a clause in here saying that any member who is agreed to have breached the code of conduct can be removed from the network.
Okay, code of conduct, it is another term of reference, right?
This document on the screen, this is the civil society terms of reference, if you like, but it's not the MSG terms of reference. Yeah, but the MSG terms of reference have got something similar, that a person can be removed if the rest of the MSG agree to remove them.
It's kind of a memorandum of understanding, right? It's called conduct.
It's a rule.
Yeah, that's a rule. It's a rule in the terms of reference.
It's not a declarative document, but it is a rule which can be applied and have not a legal, but at least regulatory.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, this is because of the way things are done in the UK. The multi-stakeholder group is not a legal entity. In some countries, I think it's created as a legal entity. We don't have a legal, so it's not really a law, but it's an internal law, rule, internal law.
Do you have
are you referring to the MSG terms of reference, or to these internal ones for civil society? Well, we took a vote. So we had a vote 2 months ago. 22 of our members voted in favour of it, and nobody voted against it. This difficult person and his supporters didn't bother to vote. No, we had an electronic vote. He decided, and he's now decided that they're not part of the civil society network, although he used us to get his people elected. And now he's saying he's not part of the civil society network. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how unpleasant and difficult it is to deal with.
And a new NGO who wants to enter this game, they need to agree to this group. Right?
Yeah, the one criterion now is we say, okay, you're welcome to join, but you have to say you agree to these membership principles. If you agree, you can join.
And
So,
there is no principle to exile the member.
well, we haven't, it's not explicit. All we say here is all members are expected to observe the code of conduct. Again, I mean, we consulted on it and other colleagues felt we didn't want to make it too rigid.
Because you want to have open space with different opinions and ideas presented, so you don't want to be too restricted, but at the same time, you want to make sure these individuals or organizations that have ulterior motives don't end up disrupting the whole system.
Yeah, it's a question of messaging as well. For example, some of our members work for church-based organizations, the Catholic and the Protestant, Christian Aid and CAFOD. So they thought it was really important because of their work in developing countries, so that it is open to everybody. I mean, we were saying, well, maybe it should be only be open to academics as individuals or people who have expertise. And they say, no, if we were working in Nigeria, we wanted to set up a civil society network, we wouldn't start excluding individuals because they didn't have a degree or they didn't have expertise. So we've made it very open in that respect.
So do you have any criteria for those who want to participate?
Just that they must accept these principles. That's the only thing.
In our case, we said they cannot be government entities.
Yeah.
They cannot be representatives of companies.
Oh, sure.
So we set some minimum.
Oh, yeah,
criteria.
that is included here because we say.
They cannot have funding from government.
Yeah, we didn't go into so much detail, but we do say they have to be civil society organizations only. So we say, what do we mean by civil society organizations? And then we adopted the EITI global definitions, which are up here, which you can reference, which are not perfect. They include trade unions. Some people might say trade unions are not civil society, but in the UK context, we recognize that they are.
We don't have to.
No, okay. So your rule is no funding from government or private sector, is that right? Yeah. I mean, my personal inclination.
Private sector funding has been a little bit confusing because the degree, I guess, maybe what we need to discuss is how much private funding, or zero. Private funding.
I mean,
those are decisions that need to be.
Do you have
private meaning? Private meaning
business.
mining sector funding.
Yeah. Do you have Transparency International? Yes, I thought so. Yeah. I mean, in Armenia, do you have any industry funding? Because in the UK, I'm not sure if you were in the room, they do receive a bit of industry funding.
And the global
yeah.
Also
yeah.
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 It's a company which is functioning globally.
Yeah.
And we are not directly.
Sure. Well, I mean, to me, it's not a problem because I know the organisation, and people trust the organisation. Not to, how could Transparency International itself be corrupt? It would be very, very odd. Okay.
Other things have happened.
That's true as well. That's true. Can't be complacent.
In Armenia, everything is possible because we have a commission, governmental commission, anti-corruption commission, and two heads of those commissions are people who are perceived in Armenia to be most corrupt.
Similarly happened in Nigeria.
The most corrupt persons are the head of anti-corruption commission.
Okay, so those are the recommendations. I thought if it's helpful, we can just look at some of the examples in detail, but we don't have to. I mean, the rest of today is really what you want it to be, so we can keep working through this document, look at examples.
Look at Republic of Congo, because I think from Jean-Claude, I think, was the CSO representative, right?
No, but this is not Democratic Republic of Congo. This is Congo-Brazzaville. What they did in the DRC, and I did put a link to it, they produced very, very detailed terms of reference, including things about conflicts of interest and funding and all that, which can look at it. The other interesting thing about the DRC is they set up, in fact the link is here, they set up an institutionalized evaluation system so that I think 4 times a year, the MSG representatives have to meet with the civil society constituency and actually have to help them develop an understanding of the whole EIT. It's like a skill sharing process and an evaluation.
As a whole?
No, civil society in the DRC. There is a document here. I'll just see if I can find it. Might take me a while actually, sorry, I didn't prepare the thing. But I mean, what would be most useful for everybody around the table now?
You can go around and
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I suggested here, just sort of kind of thinking in advance of coming, was that if you wanted to, you could sort of go through more of a formal process of kind of like strategic thinking, a SWOT analysis, you know, think about the strengths of civil society in Armenia, the weaknesses, the challenges, the opportunities, agree some objectives, but maybe that's for another time.
I think that's an exercise.
Okay.
Organizing.
So, I mean, if as Alan suggests, you'd like to just raise general points of concern or questions, things that you're interested in, we can refer to some of these resources where necessary, things you'd like to discuss a bit more.
So you are completing your presentation?
Well, I didn't plan it. I mean, I planned this agenda, but really knowing that a lot depends on what people want to focus on when we're here. So, for example, Lena did a consultation, I think by email, so the second part of the Thursday morning agenda, which we haven't covered, various people raised issues about the need for additional data, networking to access data from Canada, US and EU, corporate social responsibility and social payments, economic impacts, social and environment impact disclosure. We can discuss any of these if you want.
Are you going to discuss financial ownership standard?
We can talk about beneficial ownership. I mean, we have covered it a bit, but we can talk more about it. Let me just check. Yeah, I've got a link. I mean, should we start off there and let's see where that takes us?
Maybe we should collect questions and then
okay.
try to organize our next 45 minutes.
Okay, and then, you know, if
beneficial ownership is
yeah,
one issue.
Yeah,
okay.
but more I would like to specify how this offshore companies work, how is offshore regulation because we're not well acquainted to know that there is something weird and laws here and there, but we are not very well familiar with how this is
sure. Okay, well maybe the way to address this is to first look at what the EITI provides on paper, what the process and the rule will be, and then think that through and think how far that will kind of, what that will deliver and what it won't deliver maybe. So, okay, so beneficial ownership, anything else?
Any specific topic here? Okay, thanks. Ms. Graham?
Public participation-ի հետ կապված ժամկետները, որը տրամադրվում է հասարակությանը աշխատելու եղած նյութի վրա, ոնց է լիազոր մարմինը այդ նյութը ուսումնասիրում, թե ուսումնասիրում է միայն լսումների ժամանակ, թե առանցին, հաշվի առնել հասարակության մոտեցումը, կարծիքը, հիմնավորումը, այդ հարցերը եւ մյուս հարցը կապված է ես պարզապես չի ուզում ընդհատել հեղինակին այդ լատին ամերիկյան երկրները արդեն գնում են դեպի Օրհուսի կոնվենցիայի վավերացմանը ես ուզում եմ իմանալ այդ երկրներում կա սահմանադրության մեջ պահանջ որ առաջնային է միջազգային պայմանագիրը նույնը UK-ի հանրության որտեղ արդեն իրենց մոտ շատ սպეციფიկ է ես դա չեմ կարող
One հարց էր որը
anything you would like to cover?
Okay.
The same just in terms of public participation.
Okay, we can talk about that.
I don't know, maybe you already talked about that during the previous days. I'm interested to hear about from within the multi-stakeholder group, things happening there, how the problems are solved, what is the cooperation, conflict, some kind of within.
So like the decision making within the MSG. And,
Yes.
okay, we did cover it a bit, but we can talk more about it.
Okay, so I was then referring to
Yeah, but you know, There's no reason why we can't talk a bit of yeah. Did you want to add?
Some technical issues if possible. Where are you gathering this down office? The neutral office. What the MSG meetings are.
Oh, okay. Location. Location of meetings. Okay. Anything else?
One more tactical question. Do you have feeling that this process can go until creation of some international treaty, establishment of formalized regulatory institution?
So will it be replaced eventually by some, like an international convention or something like that?
Establish a new convention regarding the resource exploitation and
okay.
the national Rio.
Okay. Okay. So we have 6 suggestions. Talk about the beneficial ownership reporting requirement. Talk about public participation. Whether international conventions prevail over local laws, the MSG decision-making process, location of meetings, and whether the EITI will eventually be replaced by a kind of overall global institution. Yeah? So if we just work through these points in time. On the supplementary material, I included on beneficial ownership, sorry, I'm just trying to, there is a new EITI fact sheet, which I think we can look at. Let me just get that up in front of me. Where is the, link. It's on the agenda, it's on the supplementary material. I just don't know why I can't get the... Look at this. Okay. Please bear with me, folks. Sorry about this. Here we are. Yeah, under supplementary material session 4, beneficial ownership disclosure, there's a link there. So I'm going to get that document, which I think is a new, this is a document produced by the Secretariat. Okay. There was a pilot.
I'm sorry, maybe just between, maybe some people around the table, are we all clear what beneficial ownership is?
Would anybody like a brief explanation?
Just very quick, define it in the book.
Okay. The idea of beneficial ownership is to identify the people, the individuals, who ultimately control or own a company. So that, as we know, many companies are owned by other companies, and there's a whole kind of cascade of ownership and involving offshore jurisdictions, and it's impossible to know. Yeah. For example, it's often the case that a government official will have a private ownership stake in an extractive company, and that company will be awarded a contract, maybe by the same government official, and it's impossible to know. So, not just in the extractive industries, but globally, there is now concern that to address corruption and bring about greater transparency, government authorities and citizens should know, as far as possible, who are the people who ultimately own these companies, so the individuals. When it comes to a publicly listed company on a stock exchange, yes, did you want to?
Սնստիկիր ասեմ, միգուցե ձեզ համար կամ այդ երկրներում խնդիրը պարզելու համար թե ովքեր են շահառուները վերջնական, բայց այսօր Հայաստանի դերօգտագործողների, ասենք, 70%-ը, 90%-ը, բոլորս գիտենք ովքեր են ու հիմնականում կառավարության նախկին կամ ներկա ներկայացուցիչներ են հայտարարել եւ պարզելու խնդիր չեմ տեսնում ես այդպես խնդրեմ, բայց եթե մենք տեղյակ ենք, ասենք թե, հա, մենք տեղյակ ենք, այս ինչ հարկավայր է, այս ինչ, չգիտեմ, դեպուտատի պատգամավորին է, մեկը այս ինչ նախարարին է, կամ նախկին նախարարին է, կամ գործող նախ, եւ ինչ, դրանից հետո, ես ուզում եմ հասկանամ, պարզեցինք, դրանից հետո ինչ կարելի անել, ինչ գործողություններ եւ կամ ինչ։ Պարզեցինք, հրապարակում ենք ուղղակի հանրությանը, որ սենց է եւ բրծանք, թե ինչ-որ մեխանիզմներ, ինչ-որ հետևանքներ պարզելուց հետո կա, որ կարելի է, որովհետեւ մեր համար դա դες մեծ պրոբլեմ չի, պարզել մենք համերը գիտենք որը ումն է։
Does everybody agree with that? Is that the situation?
My opinion would be that there's a lot of rumors about who owns what. At times there is no evidence, hard evidence. Some of the mines are clear. There is evidence, but some are not. But there is the question of what are the mechanisms, redress mechanisms. There is that question I think about.
My first
Էական չի, լավ, պարզեցինք, իմացանք, իմ հարցը հետևյալում է, թե դրանից հետո ինչ։ Պարզեցինք շարում, դրանից հետո ուղղակի։
Anybody else? I mean, I'm happy to respond, but does anybody else wish to comment on this question at this point? If not, I would say number one, is this information easily available to any citizen? Is it rumor, or can you go to a website and you can just find out exactly who owns?
Լավ, կներեք, ես իմ հարցը վերաձևակերպեմ, դուք շեղվում եք մենք։ Լավ, պարզեցինք, չգիտենք, պարզեցինք շահառուներից ով է, որ պետական պաշտոնյան է, չգիտենք, կներեք, որ ասացի մենք գիտենք։ Բայց չգիտենք, պարզեցինք, դրանից հետո ես ուզում եմ հասկանամ հետևանքը, պարզում ենք ուղղակի իմանալու համար, թե կա ինչ-որ մեխանիզմներ կամ ինչ-որ գործիքներ, ինչ-որ ազդեցություն ունենալու, չէ, ես դա եմ ուզում հասկանամ։ Իմ հարցի առարկան կոնկրետ դա է։
Well, I still think the first question is, do citizens know? I mean, you know because you are a specialist in this area, perhaps, but is it in the public domain? Because the first principle is that if this is the situation, it's not against the law, but the citizens have a right to know which public officials, which politicians have ownership in which companies. So the first principle is the information must be made easily available and freely available to everybody. And once that information is freely available and known to everybody, there is the beginning of the opportunity to influence, because then, for example, you can write an article in a newspaper. Do people realize that if you go to this website, you can read that all the mining companies in Armenia are all partly owned by politicians and government officials? You can begin to raise awareness and concern and have a debate. The function of the EITI is not necessarily to solve any problem quickly, but is to create a public debate so citizens can begin to make an assessment. Is this good? Is this good for ourselves? Is this bad? Where do we need to bring about reform? That would be my view. In many countries, I mean, also there is a difference between, I don't know how the market operates in Armenia, but in the West you have publicly listed companies which have public registers of shareholders where you can read who the shareholders are, but you have private companies that are not currently obliged to list their ownership. And the beneficial ownership disclosure reform is intended to apply more to private companies. where there is currently no legal obligation of that company to declare who the individual people are who own it. I think that's a global situation. Yes.
I would bring two more justifications with regard to this paper from the legal and financial point of view. First, of course, we know about it actually, and investigative journalists published many articles, nobody argued, even those officials. Even more, I would say that the official, high-ranking official told that, yeah, okay, I'm an owner of this mine, so what I wasn't. He's a former minister of nature protection, right? From the official, legal point of view, it will be officialized, because this will be officially already. There will be registered, which will be officially published, and the next step will be financial interference, because this EITI initiative, is actually the initiative to bring more investments to private companies, to the state, because of so-called transparency, etc. And we will have official ground to affect on those financial flows, arguing to those financial organizations who finance or invest or even to buy the ore, that this is not in line with this anti-corruption principles. This is so legal and financial points of view, and to justify again one more time my position, it's interesting to refer to this document, this paper. The first line is the identity of the real owners, is the heading of this. And what is written here? Beneficial owners of the companies that have obtained rights to extract oil, gas and minerals is often unknown, hidden by a chain of unaccountable corporate entities. This problem affects other sectors and often helps to feed corruption and tax evasion. People who live in resource-rich countries are at particular risk of losing out as extractive as assets as are too often miscontrolled, etc. For corruption risks. Yeah. So it is directly referred to corruption risk of beneficial ownership, and as far as within this document or based on this document, there will be a list of owners or companies, whatever, who are connected with these offshore companies. There will be at least suspended, and civil society will have tools, instruments to refer officially and to affect on the overall financial and legal procedures in this area. So that's my point of view with regard to this beneficial ownership sheet or information.
Another example could be if the EITI report is published, so anybody can go on 1 or 2 clicks, find the list of the companies and who the beneficial owners are, or there's a public registry. Supposing there is a decision taken by the government to allocate a particular exploitation license to a particular company, and there's an official in the same ministry who has an ownership of the company, you can use that information to embarrass the government. And every government internationally wants to appear that they are operating well, that they're not corrupt, that decisions are correctly made. So if Armenia is a member of the EITI, it doesn't want to be seen to be making corrupt or very questionable decisions, and there's potential leverage there. So,
if I could just,
yeah, please.
I think there's one more aspect that we need to understand much deeper. If you're interested in bringing highly reputable international companies into your country, it's very unlikely that they will ever come to Armenia unless this financial transparency rules are in place, because they could get into trouble in the US, in EU, if they start investing in countries where there is dirty money. They're going to be prosecuted in those countries, in their own home countries. So there's real interest to really bring out all the transparency elements so that the investment environment improves. So you don't have these goofy characters showing up. The Armenian mining sector is dominated by people. Valex was a computer sales company, became a mining operation. Cronimet was a scrap metal dealer in Germany, became a owner of the biggest mine in Armenia. So you don't have this character suddenly showing up, and all sorts of potential for corruption. And if you have reputable companies coming in, they're not going to come in unless you have this transparency platform.
Lydian has no experience.
Yeah, they've never done mining. Yeah.
And not a single mine being exploited by Lydian. Such a vulnerable region that they want to operate.
There's a court case currently underway in the English courts and in Italy involving Shell and Eni, ENI, the Italian oil company. They did a deal with the Nigerian government some years ago for a particular offshore oil block. They paid $1.1 billion to the Nigerian government. Immediately, the Nigerian government paid $1.1 billion to an offshore company that had been set up by a former oil minister, Dan Atete, who had been prosecuted for corruption in another jurisdiction. And so Shell and Eni are denying any association between the two deals, but this is a global witness investigation. They have found internal documents to show that the oil companies knew this money was going to go to this offshore shell company, and those cases are now going through the courts. So there is a deterrent value there if you know the identity of the owners of the companies. Shall we just look briefly through this document, just what it tells us about beneficial ownership in the EITI process. So under the 2013 standard, there was a recommendation that there should be public registers of beneficial ownership. And there's been a lot of support for that. The UK was actually the first company to agree to establish a public register, and that is now being developed, although it hasn't been published yet. Other countries have followed, including the Ukraine and Denmark. Not too many.
I'm sorry, this would be companies that are headquartered in UK, or
yes,
any company that does any kind of
fundraising? I think headquartered, because this doesn't include stock exchange listed companies, because it's considered that they have to publish their registers of their primary shareholders. That's considered adequate. So this just applies to private incorporated companies. And then it details the new requirements of the standard. So the recommendation is a publicly available register of beneficial owners for all the companies that operate or bid for invest in the extractive industries. And beneficial owner has to be an individual human being, has to be a person, not a company. So then you need to know the level of ownership, and I think the proposal is that their date of birth and their nationality is recorded.
Just on this point, I think in a country like Armenia, where the cousin or the driver of this person becomes the obvious owner, we will not solve that problem, but at least we'll know it's the driver of this person.
Sure.
Is it possible that for the offshore zones, they would register the property on their own?
For now, until they wise up and they start changing,
Yeah. But when you're talking about the driver, there is this point about PEPs, politically exposed persons. So there is a similar requirement as part of beneficial ownership. Let's find what the requirement is here. Sorry, it was my search.
I guess this process will lead to prohibition of offshore companies to operate in mining industry, and that will be the best and the simplest solution.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so not only the beneficial owners, but politically exposed persons, so anybody who is in the government or who is in the family of the government or a close associate. There will be a limit, so a junior government official maybe wouldn't be included. say you work as a janitor in a government building, I don't think that would be included. There has to be a line would be drawn. Yeah. So if they have any ownership at all of one of these companies, that also has to be reported. I'm just wondering if there's a bit more detail on politically exposed persons. No, it's not given there in any detail. So just looking quickly at the requirement is now that by January 2070, next year, if your country is implementing the EITI, you have to publish a roadmap for disclosing beneficial ownership information. And from January 2020, if you're in the EITI, the country has to publish information in the EITI report or elsewhere with a link from the EITI report, giving full information about the identity of beneficial owners and how they can exercise control or ownership, and it must disclose any gaps or weaknesses in the information, and after 2020, if the information is not complete, the likelihood is that the country will not achieve validation as compliant for that reason. So the information has to be the name of the beneficial owner, the nationality, country of residence, and any politically exposed persons. Here's the definition. We don't need to go into that now.
If I could just,
sure.
One of the issues in the discussion of the European directive, the anti-money laundering directive, that's requiring EU to set up this registry of beneficial owners. One of the discussions, and I hope I'm remembering correctly, is that there's a threshold of percentage of ownership in the company. So they only have to report if they're 25% or more owner of the company. But there's a problem there, because someone can divide their shares into companies that are 15% owners. They have 5 companies, and they will never end up being reported. So they.
But the ownership of those, you mean because the individual owners of those companies won't own more than 15%. That's correct. Right? Yeah.
So there is an exposure that the EU directive has, and when they're discussing, they're recommending make sure when you set up your requirements, you're cognizant of this possibility that if you set the thresholds 25%, a person could be setting up several companies and invest, and you will never catch them.
And was this issue that any percentage of the ownership is disclosed? I mean, even if it's 1%,
I think it's up to Armenia to decide.
No, I mean, was this
in the European level, I'm not sure. The UK government decided on 25%. I think civil society wanted 5%. In the EITI, we wanted 5%, because some countries have got a lower threshold, but industry wouldn't agree to 5%. So, and there is a difference. I don't understand company law enough. There is a difference between legal ownership and beneficial ownership, because legal ownership can be a company that owns a subsidiary, but this has to be the individual person.
But you don't have to report unless you're 25% or more owner.
Yeah,
in that case, some one person can hide behind several companies and you'll never find them.
Yeah, and of course, one of the issues is if it's a very large company, 1% can be a lot of money, but the largest companies tend to be publicly listed, so they have to report their major shareholders anyway. So apart from the chronology, so there's a review of the various ways this has been applied in different countries. Tajikistan has published a beneficial report, a beneficial ownership report already. I don't know what the threshold is. I wonder if they give thresholds. These were the countries that undertook the pilot: Cameroon, DRC, Ghana, Indonesia, Nigeria, Ukraine. So, I mean, it's useful reading for you to get a sense of what the area of practice is and what the best practice currently is. And here's shows you which countries have made good progress towards that disclosure. And these are more countries showing, so obviously a lot of work has been done in a lot of countries preliminary to this. Maybe we don't need to go into the detail now, but it's available in that document. Does that cover the points you wanted to raise, or are there other aspects that you want to discuss?
So what is the advantage of being registered in the national
For companies?
Yes. Is it the registration process that is so easy and taxes are...
Well, I'm not an expert on all these tax issues, but low tax, anonymity, in some offshore jurisdictions, the company does not have to publish an annual financial report. The secrecy, profit shifting. So you can, for example, register all your intellectual property in the Virgin Islands, and then you're operating in Armenia. You say, well, we have to pay the Virgin Islands branch for all our intellectual property, like our logo and our brand, etc. And that's very expensive. So none of this money's profit is an intercompany payment for services. So you reduce your tax in Armenia. I'm sure there are other aspects, but you know.
But you think the major part is the anonymity?
I don't know. I mean, I think they both seem to be very important incentives. Of course,
in the U.S., the main incentive is evading tax. It's not so much anonymity; it's evading taxes.
But if you are a corrupt government official in a country and you don't want it to be noticed that you're taking money out of the industries, then the main advantage is anonymity, probably. Like this Nigerian ex-oil minister who got over $1 billion.
And how it happens that countries like US or UK are their own
because they are corrupt countries in that respect. I mean, the UK likes to present itself as the example to the world, but the UK is one of the worst countries for this issue. And civil society has been asking the government for 4 years at least, when are you going to force these offshore zones to disclose beneficial ownership? And they say, well, we are having conversations with them, we're trying very hard. But the UK government is quite embarrassed now that they're not getting the commitment from these countries.
Do you think you can change something?
I don't know, we keep trying. I mean, publish what you pay, where I focus my work, doesn't focus on the broader issue of this, but many of our members are like Oxfam in the UK, Transparency International. I mean, now the UK government has just agreed that we have a big problem of foreign money coming into the UK, very rich people to buy up houses and property, all the buildings. Nobody can afford to buy a home. And a lot of these people are corrupt, government officials and so on. So now there is a lot of pressure on the government to require beneficial ownership disclosure. If you want to buy a house or a flat in the UK, you have to disclose your beneficial ownership. It's not law yet, but it will come. So little by little by little, we're increasing the disclosure, but it's a very slow process. Anything else on beneficial ownership? Okay, well, yeah, I was going to say, finish beneficial ownership, then maybe take a lunch break till 1:30. For those who've had enough, it's been a pleasure meeting you, and you know, you go when you're ready. I'm happy to come back till 4 o'clock for anyone who wants to carry on. We've got other topics people wanted to talk about.
Who would like to come back at 1:30 or 2?
Well, we've got public participation, international conventions and national law.
We may, I think those are short questions.
MSG decision making.
Right now.
Well, let's just go through the list. MSG decision making, location of meetings, I can tell you in the UK it's the government ministry, we meet in the government ministry, subgroups meet locally.
Subgroups don't have to meet they can meet elsewhere.
Anyway,
all right.
Okay.
Your home
And your question, which is quite a big question, whether the EITI will one day be replaced by some kind of international regime. I mean, I think if those who are going to continue probably would welcome a break. But it's for you all to decide by consensus or a majority vote. What do you want to do?
Let's go on and finish this and then.
Finish all this list?
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Well, whatever.
Ես կարող եմ մի 5 րոպե
Մենք կարող ենք 5 րոպե շարունակել դերս մի
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy, you know, I think, yeah, if we are going to carry on, we should at least have a short break.
Okay.
But not a lunch break currently. Okay.
Some 5-10 minutes
Okay.
away
Okay.
And then finish it off, and then I think after that people will go.
Okay.
And we don't have to come back. Yes.
Yeah.
Come make them another one still.
But I'm willing, you know,
Joe
I need to be here till 4 o'clock. So if anyone wants to stay in the room and talk about issues.
You can come to upstairs to the third floor, and we can have separate rooms. You can have
Okay, so we have a short break now anyway, yeah?
I'm sorry.
Hello.
I'm really sorry I came late, but some of the questions that are on the agenda, and I thought that you were willing to speak about them, which is the experience of countries, Tajikistan, I don't know. You know, some of the countries that you mentioned in the agenda. I would be interested in
I don't have this information. They're included there because somebody asked, but the idea was that people who know about these countries can share what they know.
Oh, okay. So
I'm afraid I don't know what's happening in these countries.
We know.
Maybe before we take off also, then Arthur, who was here, sitting across from you, not this Arthur, Ambartsumian, took the initiative on our behalf to purchase a little gift for you.
Oh, really? Okay.
And we will use this as an opportunity to remind that we need to make decisions in a consensus format, but this was not made, but we're happy that
well, that's very kind. Thank you so much. Am I allowed to open it? Oh, how beautiful. That's that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a lovely gift. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so we'll just break till 1 o'clock and then we'll carry on at 1, if that's okay? Yeah? Yeah. I understand the theme. This is really very nice. Okay. We'll just cover as much as you want to, for as long as you want to. So the next issue somebody raised was public participation. I'm not sure if that was just left. Does anybody want to talk more about that? We talked about it a bit already. If not, we can just move to the next one.
Yes.
So the next issue was International Convention Local Laws. It was also the lady who left. And I think, I mean...
The lady who left was this Aida?
The lady is a representative of government. She's officially a representative of government.
I thought she's a professor.
Professor of university at the same time and creating an NGO at the same time. So in the Geneva, when we speak about the issues of compliance of Armenia with the Aarhus Convention, because she's a focal point of this Aarhus Convention, she's against the NGOs. Then she came here and be a part of NGOs. So this is one of the matters.
This is the kind of issues we have. I mean, in the UK Civil Society Network, we have a master's degree student at the University of Dundee, where the faculty is financed by the oil companies. So is this person a member of civil society or not? You don't know. No. I don't trust him. I don't trust his
In this case, you don't know, but in this case, we know. Because in Geneva, I sit here representing NGOs. She's sitting there in front of her member of company, and she's representing the position of the state. Just against. We are speaking about the access to justice for NGOs regarding the environmental matters. And she said, no, NGOs doesn't have right to participate.
This is the kind of issue we all faced with it in the civil society constituency. You have to work out your solution. I don't have that answer. Okay, so we're not going to discuss the Aarhus Convention unless anybody wants to. It's not so relevant. So you had a question about MSG decision making, and we spent quite a bit of time on this yesterday.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to sort of repeat too much detail. Did you see when I showed the UK MSG page, web page? On there you can get the terms of reference. That describes the process. It's meant to be consensus. We've never had to have a vote in the UK MSG, but there are times when civil society has had to be very strong in principle and to win the argument. But of course voting, it may come to voting sometimes. Location of meetings, MSG meets in the government ministry. The subgroups meet at an NGO, at a company, by telephone, anywhere. Not really an
The
issue.
MSG meetings, is that defined where to go, and there's no concrete place to have meetings?
Well, we always meet in one of the meeting rooms because that's the easiest way to provide it.
Officials? Official bodies? Meeting rooms of official bodies and a municipality or state-owned building?
It's a state-owned building, I assume. It's just the ministry building. The MSG is a semi-official body. It's a national commission. That's the other word used to describe it. Do you think that's an issue of concern to meet in the government building?
Just it's very difficult and comprehensive procedure to enter to the government
Oh,
building.
maybe that's more
People
difficult.
with guns are staying there. And,
Well, we have armed police sometimes outside our government, but you go in and you give your name. You've already told the chair who's going to be attending. They give you a little security pass. It's not been a problem. And then your big question was, will the EITI be replaced by some kind of international institutional framework? Well, I come back again to the issue of this mandatory reporting anyway, but of course it's not the same thing. But I think the EITI is an institutional framework. What it's not is compulsory. It's a voluntary framework for countries to sign up to. What would be the effect of making it compulsory? Who would decide it's compulsory for every country? How would you would, what, like through a vote of the United Nations?
it would be look like other treaties to be adopted. For instance, within the international organization, countries will adopt those regulations, such as compulsory for their own national legislation, and being then incorporate into their legislation.
I've never heard it suggested. I mean, it may be discussed by some people. I've never heard it suggested that the EITI becomes some kind of mandatory international standard, like a convention that a country is bound by. But maybe you're the first person to come up with the suggestion. I don't know.
Or maybe this is beyond of those this initiative beyond of those national regulations, because we all see that those regulations are not working duly.
Well, it could be that.
But also, this is really an initiative for the private sector mostly.
Well, you know, that's an interesting debate. One of the expert commentators, called Michael Ross, an American academic, he says that in theory the EITI is to make companies accountable, but what it really makes is governments accountable, because the government has to publish a lot more information. The companies just have to report their payments. The companies have to publish all the content section. It's quite an interesting article. And he doesn't think there's enough accountability from companies. I think I agree with that. And you know, the obvious thing is the social and environmental impacts of what they do, which they don't have to report on.
Yeah, but I mean, it all started from the big global companies being pissed off that all they're paying, or what some part of what they're paying to the third world states is being robbed by the oligarchs.
No, it didn't start because the companies were pissed off. It started because civil society
was pissed off at the companies, and the companies were like, okay, what do you want from me?
Exactly.
Go ask your own government. And then they were like, okay, we need to create some sort of a shield under which we can be protected. So EITI is really like,
well, you could say it's a shield. What the first company that did it was BP in Angola, and they published a particular payment, and the Angolan government said, if you keep publishing those payments, you're going to be out of business here. So then BP said, well, we'll keep doing it if other companies have to do it as well. And the UK government supported that idea. So it became the idea of a global standard, and in fact the Angolan government didn't kick them out. You could say it's a shield, but I mean, that's looking at it in a pessimistic way, but the more optimistic way is it's a mechanism that has gradually opened up the payments and made the companies have to be more accountable, and they don't really like it all that much. I mean, the fact that in the United States Exxon won't report its taxes, they don't like being asked for this information. So if they don't like it, it must be good.
Some of them.
Yeah.
It depends on which country also.
That's true.
If they are operating in Angola, they would be totally happy with it anyway, you know.
Well, not exactly, because it has exposed some very questionable payments in Angola, these social payments that we discussed before.
I'm sorry, did you discuss the social payments in the
Not in detail. We can talk a bit about that now, if you want. What do
I was
others...
really interested in how the social payment is defined in the standard itself, because we discussed it yesterday, it was defined more like the legal obligatory, but how about the charity payment?
Oh, but they're also potentially included if the MSG agreed.
Okay, so it's a decision up to MSG, because this is a very important point.
Yeah.
That the MSGs in Armenia actually to push this forward and say anything that goes out of the company to any entity within Armenia or outside Armenia has to be reported, because sometimes they also they can present it as an expense, you know. For example, one of the mining companies has its own foundation. You know, it's sort of a public foundation. Manes. And so they actually make these transfers to their own foundation. Sometimes this can also be presented as an expense. You know?
And it is.
It is in theory, because then it's reduced from the exactly.
Well, if you look here, so the multi-stakeholder group has to agree. It's meant to agree whether to cover discretionary social expenditures. And I think there's a bit more detail here. Did we look at this yesterday? I can't remember. Social expenditures, where they're mandated by law or the contract, they have to be reported and where possible reconciled. Where they're discretionary, the multi-stakeholder group is encouraged to develop a reporting process with a view to achieving transparency. So you can legitimately raise this in the MSG with the government and the industry, saying this is envisaged in the standard.
What if they say we don't have to do it? It's on our website, whatever is on our website, go yourselves, have a look. The experience shows that they're also quite selective in what they're reporting on their website, because they report things that look very nice, but things that go into the president's foundation, they don't report it. We find out accidentally somehow else.
Well, they're not obliged, according to this.
But they can say no.
Yeah, unfortunately they can.
They can't say anything now, but it's up to us to push it.
Yeah. But you have the other way to push it. I mean, I think we talked about this before you came in today.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Everyone's busy. No, just to say, the other channel is we as civil society have our representatives at the international level in the EITI. So you form, like me, part of the civil society global constituency. I've been told that Armenia is Europe. So formally there is a Europe and North America representative on the EITI board. His name is Danny Kaufman. Before every EITI global meeting, he has to organize a telephone conference with us where we can raise our concerns.
Us means MSG or us?
No, the civil society global, the regional civil society constituency. So I was saying it's important when the MSG begins to operate in Armenia, that civil society people get into contact with Publish What You Pay International Secretariat, which coordinates this process, so that you or some of you will be invited onto this call. You can say we believe that the next goal for civil society should be that all social payments have to be reported, whether they're mandatory or discretionary.
So we motion it to the global EITI.
And begin to affect the agenda, because that's how the EITI has changed. through civil society deciding where we need more progress.
Yeah.
That's the way it's happening.
Yeah, because it reveals a lot of the other things, you know, when the company is funding, what was the name of that guy's name, whatever, the Australian thing? Sustainable, responsible mining something, whatever.
Oh, in Angola?
Well, that was one in Australia.
Yeah, right, okay.
And so it's 80% funded by the mining companies, but then we thought it was an academic institution, and so we're pretty cheated.
Yeah,
So it's important that, you know, when
sure.
the companies actually finance those things and they come and represent civil society or academia, at least we're not cheated about
Sure.
who they are or how they're funded.
So yeah.
So, anything else anyone wants to talk about?
Yeah, Goxi, can you tell us about, like, is it more of an industry website or it's...
No, I think it was set up by the World Bank.
Yeah.
It's open to all stakeholders. Civil society people use it. I'm on it. I read the stuff sometimes. I don't like everything I read there, but you can participate.
I'm sort of getting the articles,
Yeah.
and sometimes I feel like it's more, yeah, very much like the World Bank promoting the industry.
You know, the World Bank's role in this agenda has not been entirely negative. It's been quite constructive, I think.
So what has been constructive?
Well, for example, the World Bank is now very strongly encouraging the publication of contracts and licenses.
Okay.
The World Bank has done a lot of work on data standards, how do we maximize the availability of data. The World Bank coordinates the multi-donor trust fund, which supports civil society in some EITI implementing countries.
Like in Armenia?
Well, it might do. I think Nareen said that once Armenia becomes a candidate, it may be possible for civil society to apply for funding. I don't know the details of how it works. I'm not an expert in this area, but the World Bank Institute in particular is a branch of the World Bank. It does listen to civil society, so I don't think all their influence has been... I know in certain areas they have a history of bad influence supporting big development projects and things. But I think there are good people within the World Bank who want to see it have a beneficial impact on development. It's not an area where I'm all that familiar with the detail. Anything else?
So these EITI meetings are taking place every 2 years?
The global ones?
Yeah.
I think every 3. The last one was 2013, yeah.
3 years.
Roughly every 3 years. Yeah.
Board meetings are every...
But several times a year, about 4 board meetings a year. And a lot of people go, I mean, in between these big meetings, go just to be at the board meeting, even if they're not on the board. So a lot of kind of networking goes on, and they discuss EITI global policy at these meetings.
At some point, I would like to look into the history of the establishment of the
Yeah,
EITI.
if you have this document, the agenda.
I have downstairs.
Yeah, okay. So on the first day we covered origins and development of the EITI, and there's the links, which will tell you a bit about that in the background and so on. Yeah.
So basically you understood that while in Armenia we are so detached from the government officials for understandable reasons, because most of the time we don't even elect them, so they're self-proclaimed government.
You mean even the ministers? They're not elected.
Even the ministers.
No, but they're not like parliamentarians. Most of the ministers. I mean, you don't.
They're all the same thing. They're all the same thing.
Yeah, but you elect members of your parliament or congress, don't you?
Well, our votes are always stolen, so that's why we don't elect the one that sits now.
Members of the parliament are different from the ministers.
Okay.
They can't be the same person.
Well, I'm saying it's the same ruling party.
So you don't trust the process, the political process?
We are super detached from what could be democratic. And so there is extreme hostility then. And you understood that there is this mistrust for very understandable reasons. So when we're sitting at the same table with the government, with this small MSG, it's going to be extremely difficult. Do you have any recommendations on how to start building some sort of trust or some sort of like really groundwork so that we can dialogue in a better way? Because at the moment, for understandable reasons, just because there's so much fraud and there's so much distrust and disgust that this is really difficult.
Yeah, I don't have experience of that. I think what Alan said is very relevant, is start off by not demonizing the people you're talking to.
Okay.
Approach them with an open mind. I mean, it's unfortunate if you know a lot about a person and they're involved in if you know that they're involved in some very bad business, but start with an open mind, but be frank about what your concerns are as matters of principle and conduct rather than about the individual.
Okay.
Say, no, this kind of situation in our country is to us unacceptable, but also is it the importance of civil society having a united perspective, I think is really important. So preparation for the MSG.
A minor, but I think an important point. This is a voluntary undertaking,
Yeah.
as opposed to some international convention to which a country
Yeah.
should be imposed or enforced to subscribe. If a country expresses an interest voluntarily,
Yeah.
right? So it should take care of really.
It should, yeah. I mean, you can
But
simply.
however, in this process, I think it's important for civil society to really take advantage and
Yeah.
to
I agree.
set the rules which will.
You can always remind the government that if there are really big concerns from civil society about the way the EITI is operating or the way decisions are made, the country will not pass validation. So they have to be willing to reform. There has to be that willingness. Sorry? Well, international reputation, attracting investment. Some politicians believe that it's correct that you're accountable to your citizens. Some politicians genuinely believe you need to eliminate corruption to make the economy work better.
But the guy expressed, like, in most honest terms from the government why the government wants to. I mean,
What is that reasoning?
he was reasoning
Okay, thanks very much to meet you. Thanks to you.
to engage new actors in the industry and investments.
Yeah.
It was the most.
But that's not illegitimate.
No, of course.
That can be, I mean, investment can be good. We shouldn't always think investment is bad, that all extractive industries have to be bad. I mean, people look at an example like Norway. I mean, maybe there are some bad examples, but in Norway, it has created wealth for the whole population, for future generations. Or if you're a very poor country, people talk about Botswana. It's not so good now, but they've used their diamond wealth to actually create literacy, to invest in social programs. That's constructive.
Actually, generally speaking, I guess that there is one more point that people don't want to know where from this investment comes from and how far is it controlled.
What investment?
Investments to the mining sector and mineral resources, the kind of understanding which kind of resources exist, sort of inventarization of resources, to understand how to deal with this kind of control.
What does it have to do with the EITI?
Because the EITI sets up the rules, how the countries and companies shall deal with, and how the reporting will be, which kind of information shall be reported. So it's information which is actually in line, at least not on the contrary of our expectations and wishes regarding the overall control of this industry.
Well, it's not going to be about any control, it's only going to be about data.
But it's also can help you raise issues.
So there's no control.
No, but it can help you raise concerns and create a public debate about, is our country getting good value? For example, and there is an issue of control. If it's foreign investors, you need to know that those foreign investors are not exploiting your country. So there has to be, by examining the data, you can begin to assess are we getting a good deal from this company that has come into our country to extract minerals? I mean, as we know, because of the whole sort of tax evasion, tax avoidance issue, the EITI at the moment will not give you all that information, but it's a start. And you can begin to raise with, sitting across the table from the government, you know, are we getting a good deal for our resources? And they have to answer to that. They may say, oh, we don't know. In that case, say, well, then you should find out more.
So that's it.
So we seem to be gradually tailing off, which is fine. It's been very interesting 2.5, 3 days for me.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Valuable information.
Wish you a lot of luck with the initiative, and look forward to hearing good progress in Armenia in future. And I've enjoyed visiting your very interesting country, only for a few days.
Who will be, or you will be available for any, in case there are interview requests or something, in the framework of the case study which I'm conducting? I don't know yet.
Yeah, let me know.
Let
me know. Yeah.
Or perhaps online or
sure.
something.
Yeah, be happy to do that. Yeah.
There was one thing that you suggested I write to you. Was it about the publish what you paid?
It could have been that. I did say I can put, if any of you, your NGOs want to join the coalition, I can forward your email to colleagues. I mean, the information's, shall I show you on the website? It's all there on the Publish What You Pay website. The membership, the membership process.
I think it would be easy to find.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to find. But while we're just sort of sitting. Does anybody want to go and have some lunch? That's what I want to do.
Sorry for not letting you.
Oh no, that's okay. No, I mean, no. Look, I'm being paid for this work and I have to do it properly. So, let's just have a look here. Let's just do something about membership. Paying member. Join the coalition. So you click on that link, you know, and it basically tells you what was involved. You don't pay money. You know, any NGO can join.
Responsible mining.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But anyway, I'm happy to respond to emails as well.
So
if you have,
then we subscribe.
so you can read about the details.
Okay.
Then you complete the membership form.
Okay.
And send it off. Complete the form, and you send
Has
it.
to be an organization.
I think so. I think so.
Can it be like an informal one?
Yeah, you don't have to be legally established as far as I know. Yeah, because one of the questions here is the organisation legally registered, which means that it doesn't have to be. So you can register, you know, you can join with your informal organisation. You have to agree to the principles, and then you'll join, and then you'll be put on the mailing list, then you'll get all the information about the activities and their campaigns, etc., etc.
So as I understand, this is an additional platform or a side platform through which a communication channel can be established.
This is a civil society coalition. Publish What You Pay is the civil society coalition that helped found the EITI, and civil society coordinates, Publish What You Pay coordinates civil society input into the EITI at a global level, and in some countries. So in the UK, where I'm the national coordinator of Publish What You Pay, I also coordinate the civil society coalition as well. Yeah.
So when was Publish What You Pay established?
I think 2002 formally, so it's been going for 10 to 15 years.
And it was established primarily in the UK, no?
The first NGOs that began it were in the UK. Sorry? It's an NGO coalition, yeah. So it was Save the Children Fund, Global Witness, Transparency International, couple of others. Open Society Foundation.
So is that a single organization, CSO, or a coalition?
Well, the Secretariat, yeah, it's a coalition of, I mean, it tells you all about it on the website. It's about 800 member CSOs all over the world, about 50 national chapters, and then the Secretariat is registered as a UK non-profit organisation.
Yeah.
So in some countries the coalition is a registered organisation. In the UK it's not, it's just informal. But this site will tell you, about the history, etc.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, would anybody like to have some food?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe later.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you for coming. Very good meeting you.
Thank you.
I wish you every good luck with the work. Yeah. And
Ես ասեմ ու կանեք։
I just wanted to say that you can still use this work.
Okay.
We have a place space.
yeah. Okay, thanks. I may come back after lunch to work here for an hour.
Not here because this
Okay, okay. What up at the institute?
Yes.
To send, okay, that's what Anna did. That's great, thank you. Because, you know, we're going at 4:45 to the television interview. I will be on television. I don't know whether this evening they're going to interview me about. I got an email from. What does it say? I don't know if it's live or will be recorded. But we're going about 5 o'clock today.